on, y'all? Welcome back to the Arcane Archive. We are so happy you guys have tuned in once again for today's astonishing episode. And really quick, before we get into it, we just wanted to kind of say off the top, thank you all once again for tuning in as often as you do. And if you guys are liking and enjoying what we're doing here, we would humbly, kindly ask that you could like, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And maybe share it with any person or peoples that you might feel would enjoy or benefit from it in any way, shape, or form. It would be incredibly helpful, and we would be ever so thankful and appreciative for any support you could offer in that regard, as always. Me and Sammy here, we've got a number of new things and new ideas in the works for the channel that we're very excited for in the upcoming future. We hope that you guys will enjoy, and we're really hoping to kind of try to expand our overall audience as best as we can. So once again, we appreciate you guys.
We're learning, and
Yeah,
so it's nice to see. And any
we're
you know,
learning. We're getting a little bit more knowledgeable, experienced with this thing.
any interaction is good interaction. I this whole idea of eventually being able to go down in a comment section and see people's opinions and talk things and go over different aspects of what we talk about here is something that I've always found intriguing and wanted to do. And
yeah. Eventually, maybe we even get to make like a whole Discord server, with that kind of thing in mind, with being able to talk about this stuff. But that being said, again, appreciate it. We appreciate and thank you guys for any assistance you could offer, as always. But you know what? Let's go ahead and dive right on into today's Meta Talk topic, because that's what we're doing today. Another episode of MetaTalks. Sammy, what are we MetaTalk talking about today?
We're doing some GM tips. We've previously talked about some positives and negatives in your D&D campaigns, specifically negatives. Today we were gonna try to go for a more positive route of
more constructive overall.
About people who are interested in DMing or just our experiences running anything and kind of what we see works, what we see doesn't work so well, how we would improve it, etc., etc. The first and foremost, I don't think either of us have run super long form campaigns. I'm definitely more of a player. I know you've run way more than me. Yeah. I'm definitely more of a player who has strong opinions about the games he plays in. But I think both of us have been around long enough to understand how these things are supposed to work, whether or not, you're good at it or you prefer one thing over the other. We've seen enough to know at least some, straight up things about DMing or about running a game.
Oh, and no, for sure. Like I was, I guess still technically am a professional GM, where I've run like a number of games, like as part of like, a company / groups kind of similar to Adventures League a little bit, not quite. But I've done that, and I've also done, a couple of just personal solo games, or not solo, but personal professional games that I've run for people, as well as just, like casual games for friends and stuff. A lot of those were like, either some of them have been modules, some of them were kind of adapted from modules, some of them I wrote and create myself. And while technically a lot of them were basically kind of designed for longer form, campaigns, it just never really got to that point because people's schedules and stuff usually end up fizzling out. And so we were never really able to continue. But I mean, a lot of that too, I've done a number of one shots. I've done a number of like multi-shots and stuff like that. So, we I would say between the two of us, we've got a pretty decent track record and resume for GMing experiences. I know I've technically been a GM for how long I feel like I've been playing for like 5 years now. So I think I'd be probably GMing for maybe like 4. I think I was like a player for a year before I really started to GM. And so I've probably been a GM for about like 4.5 years now, and then a player for about like 5.5, maybe 6 actually. I think it may have actually been 6 years at this point, as a matter of fact. now that I think about it. Regardless, point being is that me and Sammy obviously still have plenty of thoughts and opinions, but we also do have a bit of personal experiences too to derive from this, of course. That being said, Sam, did you have a particular kind of first topic that you might be interested in proposing to our friends here about what it might take and what it might be like to first try to get into GMing? For anybody out there who would be interested in taking the plunge and finally becoming the GM, instead of just the player.
I think there's two avenues you can start out with. Whether that's using a pre-written module or coming up with your own story. I have done both and or used old stories or modules from like past editions, like first and second edition, even some from fourth edition. I'll take old modules that nobody plays anymore from the early 2000s and late 90s, and then attempt to use some of the story beats in my own version, which is something I like because you can tweak the story and change it the way you will, but it gives you a set piece. But I think a lot of people, making up your own story is daunting. I know you've talked about,
take a lot.
Yeah, you've talked about, most of the stuff you've run for people, has it been all your own creation?
Yeah. Okay. or like I would say for me, in my experience, it's been a pretty even split between like module / my own, because I've made like a world completely and utterly homebrew, my own thing from scratch, and I only use like obviously like some of the pre-created monsters because it's just easier that way to like have obviously like the stat blocks and stuff like that. But in terms of like the lore, the pantheons, the island, the locations, all of that is I've already created like a ton of that, and I've run in that place a couple of times now. At other times I've run like pre-made modules, specifically when I was doing like the professional GMing for that one company. They utilize like parts of modules specifically as like an introductory thing, but then they would also start to kind of create their own narrative from that. So it was almost like a mix between a module and then homebrew with that particular thing. So I'd say for me, it's been a pretty even kind of road of like homebrew mixed with module.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's kind of the same for me. I think the only time I did anything that was homebrew, like actually homebrew, it was still set in the Sword Coast, only because it was an area that I was familiar with.
It makes sense too. Yeah.
I mean, there's a school of thought of preparing to run a campaign or even one shots where how wide do you plan? And that's something that like one of my DMs that we play consistently, he created a homebrew setting. All the cities, all the people, the whole story, all of it was his own thing. And there were times where we would start a session, and if we went in a direction that he wasn't prepared for, the session got cut short because
he didn't have enough content to like,
whether or not he wrote it all out or he needed to just cement certain things, he wasn't afraid to be like, hey, I'm not ready for you to go there.
Yeah,
we can do some traveling.
I have not built that out yet.
And so
I can't. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah,
I think for me, I can't keep all of that stuff in my head, so I tend to plan small. I tend to plan basic things and flesh them out as you play. I know some people are, some one of my other DMs, I know he writes things out. He does hours of campaign prep. I'm about the opposite. I do a good 40 minutes before I get there, and then I'm like, okay, let's go. Sometimes I don't do any. Sometimes I just read a couple of things, and I'm like, that's a good idea, and then I just run with it.
Just improvise the whole thing. Why not?
That doesn't work for everyone. And I'd say that it definitely, there
depend.
are times when that did not work out for me very well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a gamble for that, for sure. Like, it's a little bit of a gamble. Relying just almost entirely on your improvisational skills, I wouldn't say is necessarily all like just bar none a bad idea. Sometimes it can be fun and interesting where it is just like, hey, like I would say that it might be heavily dependent, as a lot of the time is, on your group that you're playing with, right? Because a lot of the times, if you're kind of just flying by the seat of your pants, it does have a not low chance of going to a spot if you don't have any real understanding or knowledge or information about a particular subject, creature, location, and your party is going there and they're like, hey, we're gonna do this, and you don't have any real background with that at all, then you're kind of screwed at that point where you're just like, well, now I got to just make up all this stuff on the spot, and it risks obviously breaking immersion, stalling the game out a bit, having to try to come up with some stuff, or potentially just introducing things in a sloppy, low quality manner. But another thing being, though, is it also has the positive aspect of like a lot of players will probably really love almost the freedom that would provide in terms of the fact that the GM is essentially always having to react off of what the players choose to do and what's happening. And it can provide a sense of the players feeling like their choices and interactions are truly have weight and truly matter, because it's like, oh yeah, you are having a literal effect on the world right now. You are literally building what's happening right now together in real time, which can be super fun and incredibly engaging for the player. So there's obviously, it's a bit of a double-edged sword there, as with a lot of things like that. What would you say is like, for those looking to again break into being a GM, like what would you say? Would you say it would be best to maybe try to just do like a one shot first to test the waters to start? Or do you think it might even be a better way to like have them again take their time with it, maybe slow it down to really build up a little bit of a foundation for their world first before they jump in? What is your thoughts or preferences on that?
I mean, part of me wants to say that I think if you're doing this for the first time, it just so that you can get all of the rules and the basics and just, feel your way into what it's going to be like, I don't think running a module is a bad idea. They've made so many short form modules now. It's not like it was when I think we first started playing. It was a lot of more longer form modules that were available, where it's like levels 1 through 7. That can take a long time. Whereas now it's like, this module's for 1 to 3, like, and it'll take you like 5 sessions, and for some that's a long time. That's more than a month, maybe even 2 months. But I think in any, like, if you look at any other tabletop game, whether it's Monster of the Week or any of these like other different kinds of games, but still have a game master, the common theme is like a lot of these things have pre-written things to base your stories on. Not necessarily you have to do what's written in front of you, but here's the rules, here's how it's going to interact with your characters and yourself. And so I think, with something like D&D where there's all of these things you have to think about, I don't think it's a bad idea to start with a module, only for the sake of if you've never played before. If you've played the game, if you're someone like me who's played for 6-7 years and you understand the rules, you have a pretty good understanding of like the general gameplay and what you like and what you don't like, then you branching off is a lot easier. But if you've never played before, it's really, really hard to get down a story, a setting that you like, and then also play at least coherently towards the rules, because for some people the rules aren't what's important, and we've talked about this before. We have some rules that we don't like, but for the most part when I play, I like to stick to the way the game was designed. If there are things that maybe work in a way I don't like in the moment, and I'm like, you know what, no, that should work, you made a good point, then I'll change things. But for the most part, I expect my players to follow equipment rules. I expect them to follow the different rules of combat and spell casting and things like that. So if I'm going to expect that from them, they should expect me to be consistent with how I rule things. And I think as a new DM, if you've never played this game before, that is an extremely daunting task. And if you have people that have played and you're running a game for them, they're going to notice, and it's going to, you might get embarrassed, or it might be hard to get through those kinds of things. I know it is for me. I know that if I'm playing a game and someone points out some huge mistake or hole in my narrative, that's not going to want to make me keep going. Not because they did anything wrong, but because personally, that's my personality. That's something I struggle with. So I assume that there are people like, similar in that way, where this is going to be a challenging task that by the end of it would be worthwhile for yourself, whether it's because you're nervous, but it's something you really want to try. So maybe giving yourself more of a skeleton to work with a module, even if you're just using the setting. You might tweak the story completely. You might change some of the characters, but even just giving yourself some bones to work with and structure your game on is so helpful. I don't know what the like for me, if I'm going to do something all homebrew, I just plan base stuff. So say we start in a town. Okay, I plan out some basic stuff about the town, some facts, their main exports, things like that, things that the players might ask about, or this major thing the town does that there might be a problem with it, and that's what the players are going to investigate. And that's all I do. I plop it on a map somewhere, and that's all I do. Anything else they want to do, I build out from there. Oh, is this god exist? Yes. There you go. I'm not gonna, my pantheons are fluid. I'm not gonna hunker down and be like, no, it has to be this, because that doesn't help me. But that requires you to write things down as you're playing, which can be hard. It is for me. I can't focus on people talking to me on the screen and also be writing things down and not have to take seconds away from it and miss things. So I don't know how you handle it. I'm assuming.
Well, I was gonna say, so with that, like, would it be accurate to say, like, you do kind of have the preference of, like, if you're gonna start this, it might be better to maybe establish a bit more of a foundation, to take your time with it, to have something to work off of instead of maybe just diving right headlong in. Like,
I'd say I think everyone who at least in the more recent years of D&D, as it's gained popularity again, I think most DMs probably started with modules. Because you go to a store, you go to a game store, you look for a couple books, and you see, what's that over there in the corner? Because early on in 5th edition, there were a couple box sets where it gave you an adventure book, a couple.
I was gonna say, usually anytime you got the pack for the starter pack, it included the beginner module, Lost Mines of Phandelver, and that's like, I think technically that is the most played module, just statistically, because it was introduced with the player's handbook, the dungeon master's guide, and the literal beginner books, where it's like, hey, this is literally to get you started here with this.
And I think for the sake of, I would say most people that play TTRPGs, you usually start out with something more constructed for you, because you've never done this. Well, I'm not going to write my own. I don't know what I'm doing. And so I think if you've never done it before, it's not a bad thing to just run something. If there's something in it you don't like, hey, look, oh, it's gone. Oh no. No one's going to care. But for me, even the groups I play with now, we've been playing for years and years and years. Both groups started with a campaign book. It wasn't freeform. It wasn't, there were liberties taken, I think, in one of the campaigns, but for the most part, we played through modules as a group. There were certain things we added to it, and via the charm of our characters that bring, that inevitably brings into the world. But it was all pre-written stuff, which I had fun. It took us years to finish both of them, and it was good. But I don't think everyone's going to start out, unless you're a writer by trade or by passion. It's not easy to jump into something and be like, I'm going to write a story, because I know we always talk about how this is a collaborative effort and this is a storytelling with all your friends, but you still have to have something, because if you just have nothing and then the players just aimlessly wander around, that's how a campaign dies. You don't do anything and then no one has fun.
I was gonna say, I think for me, like, I'll go ahead just and play devil's advocate just for the first part initially, but then I do want to talk a little bit about, like, the more specifics about it. But I will also advocate for the idea of, like, just doing it. You know what I mean? Like, for the explicit reason, even what Sammy just said is, like, honestly, like, the best teacher is experience at the end of the day, right? Like that's basically, I don't think anybody could really contest that particular idea, and that it's like, hey, you know what? Because also, as much as the thing of being like, you keep trying to set up schedules for people, right? You keep trying to like be like, hey, I'm planning for this, like let's do this, and nobody's able to kind of make it, or everybody keeps flaking out. So then finally, just like, you know what? Screw it. Like I'll be the GM, right? Because that's always one of the biggest problems, especially when you're first starting out, is you have a group of people. Nobody really wants to do the GMing part because the GMing part seems the most scary, right? It's in a lot of ways, it is ironically despite the fact that as a GM, you technically have the vast majority of power, you also are kind of the most vulnerable in a way, in that because you are the one who is now responsible for making this world and this game happen and fun and interesting to a certain extent. Technically speaking, the entire group is technically responsible for this in a lot of ways, right? The players are also just as responsible for their part in terms of like, they have to participate, be present, and engage appropriately to also make the game fun for the GM as well as the rest of their players. But the GM is the one at the end of the day who is primarily the last line of like, yo, this is what's happening. This is what's going on. This is what we're doing. Like they are the ones responsible for that. And that can be very scary and terrifying because of the responsibility that comes along with that. As well as the vulnerability. It was like, I'm doing my best here. I try to do this thing and nobody's having fun, and everybody's like, everybody's like bored or maybe angry or upset at a decision or something that happened, and I don't know what to do. It's like, it's scary. But at the same time, it's like, I would like, for those situations, even if you get right into it, somebody's got to step up at some point. Somebody's got to make the decision like, all right, you know what? I'll do it. I'm going to DM. We're going to make it happen. We're just going to jump right in here. And hopefully, if you're playing this game with these group of people, I would hope that they are truly your friends. And then they would be understanding of like, yo, everybody's new. Everybody's new. They're trying to do their best. This GM is new. And even if they make some mistakes, maybe they make some calls that don't make a lot of sense or might be a little like off the cuff or poor in decision, either way, it's like they be forgiving and understanding of they're new. Everybody's learning right now. And that can be one of that in and of itself, in my opinion, could also be an incredibly profound experience on you just jump right in there and then you learn something really important and profound with that. And then you understand the real weight of maybe having a little bit more preparation, right? Of understanding why prep a little bit, not a lot, even just a little bit of prep can astronomically change things and can be so important. Because I would also just say again, on the alternative, it's like a lot of people might also have the fear of really pulling the trigger on playing if all they're doing is planning, right? It's like, okay, I want to make sure that I have everything planned out perfectly to the last minute detail so that, you know, in case anything happens, I have something planned so that nothing can go wrong. And, you know, you can get stuck in that never ending, like, you know, Ouroboros of just like, I don't want to mess up and I want it to be perfect. And so I'm just planning. And then you never actually execute. You never actually execute the plan that you've been planning for who knows how many years because you want it to be absolutely perfect. The reality, it's never going to be absolutely 100% perfect the way you might want it to be or envision it to be, right?
Yeah.
But it can absolutely be perfect the way that it unfolds with your party and the people. If you have a great group and you all genuinely consider, respect, and mutually care about each other and about your experience here to have a good time, you better believe it will unfold in the perfect way that it should in that moment, that it's like, hey, you didn't even plan for that, right? Your initial idea was, okay, I'm going to have the party, you know, journey through this giant like valley / canyon or whatever to get to the other side to reach this area of a cave where they need to like obtain this item, right? And instead what happens is like, oh, your party somehow, some way gets like a flying machine or a flying creature, on their side. And they end up, soaring up into the skies high above to engage in combat with other like aerial creatures that are starting to like, rain down upon them due to the fact that, they summoned some kind of whatever, you know what I mean? It just snowballs out of nowhere in a way that you never before had ever assumed it possibly could, right?
Yeah.
And now you do like all your planning that you just did effectively has just gone out the window, at least for this session at this point, because they went in a completely other direction. And so, like to Sam's point, we said before, you got to have a little bit of that improvisation there. And the irony of it being is that you should always leave a little bit of room for improvisation, or even better, you can almost give the vibe or the sense of improvisation by giving a number of different choices, right? If you essentially give like a number of different choices and potential avenues for the party to explore, more often than not, they will choose at least one of those multiple choices instead of necessarily just doing something completely different and random out of nowhere from like, the one initial choice that you presented them with.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is you write all that stuff out, they take a wrong turn that you weren't expecting, and now you've thrown out all this work because they might never go back there. And
Maybe not.
That's, especially if you're not railroading your party or you're making a more open world story, unless you put a plot hook there that cannot be moved, they most likely will not go to a good 60% of the things you plan out, if not more, depending on the kind of group you have.
Yeah, depending on the kind of group.
And let's be clear, there are some groups that probably case an entire town for everything they could do and everyone they could talk to.
It's really true.
But most of the time, most people want a couple things they can interact with, and then the rest of the time they're going to spend doing what they think their character wants to do with the other characters at the table. Whether that's drinking, whether that's exploring a place outside of a town, or but they're not going to case everything.
That's why it's so important too, if you really do want to get them engaged, like GMs, it's a great, again, for beginners especially, and this might again feel rather daunting and difficult, but that's why it's also really great for you to try to incorporate your players' characters' goals, ideals, ambitions, and interweave them, here and there throughout certain plot points or plot hooks or areas, locations. Again, you take the party to a location that one of their party members, like it's their home city, right? It's where they're from. So they would have a certain amount of connection intrinsically to it, which would hold their attention, right? Because it's like they had a backstory. We're like, yeah, I experienced this stuff here as a kid or as a younger person or whatever. And you're like, oh, well, hey, guess what? That was here. And now that automatically it ties one member of the party and therefore would just by design intricately and to maybe a lesser extent, but tie the other people in the party. Again, if they are a party of people who are cohesive and they really care about one another and want each other to have these experiences, the party members are going to absolutely support the interest of this player in this place that they're now in. And that will bring them there and keep them more grounded and invested in this thing now that you have presented them. Another particular aspect about new GMs that I've heard a lot is similar in the concept of like you put too much of your eggs in one basket, where it's like you rely too heavily upon, let's say, a specific NPC, or you rely too much on the party acquiring a specific kind of item or MacGuffin or whatever to push the narrative forward. One thing that I want to try and hit home with new GMs especially, but even OG GMs, is you are never in any way, shape, or form like trapped in your narrative, right? I've heard a lot of stories about how like, oh, the GM will introduce the BBEG of the entire campaign earlier on in an attempt to establish like, some threat weight and fear or whatever in the party to like showcase, hey, this is what you have to work up to. And due to whatever inadvertent incident, the BBEG is defeated somehow in some way because of usually because of just a terrible roll on the GM's part, right? And some GMs, you don't want to do the thing where especially if the players are like uber incredibly excited about against all odds being able to defeat this seemingly nigh invincible individual. It's like you don't want to like retcon and be like, well, no, you don't actually do that. You don't defeat him. Like, even though it was like, because it's like that does feel a little sour, and it would probably suck some of the fun out of the room, right? Even if they defeated him, it's like you don't have to feel like all of that time, all that work has been crushed into dust, right? You still have so many more options to keep your narrative, your idea alive. It's like you could again say like, okay, hey, you were able to defeat that one. It was like a simulacrum of the actual BBEG, right? Where it was like it's a weaker version or copy of the actual BBEG that he sent there as a means of like an envoy or whatever else. You know what I mean? You could say like, oh, hey, there was somebody else who was actually puppeting his strings the whole time, who was the actual BBEG, and it still means like, they defeated this powerful individual.
Yeah.
But there is still someone and something there that they can still work up to at that point, even then, right? Like, it might feel a little bit cheap, like your players might feel a little bit like, but I also feel like at that point, if your players really do feel disappointed with the fact that they didn't just completely derail and destroy an entire campaign, it's like, don't you want to play the game though?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many ways to subvert stuff like that. You give him the parade, give him the big party, give him rewards for doing this thing.
Give him the win,
and then
they feel good about that.
Say this person was this evil guy was masquerading as like a normal person in the government in the city that you were stationed in, whether they're part of the family, whether they're in some sort of business with the people that are in charge. And you have all these parties and these things, and they get to have fun and go do fun things as a group. And then all of a sudden, a couple of days later or a week down the road, they get called back by this city, and they did an investigation. They found all these weird letters and cryptic messages that someone was sending this evil guy. And now the party's like, wait, was that the guy? Or like, is there someone else that we have to worry about? And if they choose to investigate, great, they can find stuff. If they ignore it, something bad's going to happen. And they're going to now have to figure out how to deal with this thing. And so, there's always another way to pull it back.
You can also, in that same similar vein, in that particular thing, be like, essentially the idea is to make the so-called number one BBEG the number two or whatever, right? And you can specifically make it where, they defeated the number two at a low level. And that means that the party inadvertently has made themselves a target for this organization that is still existent, and meaning that they're going to be hunting them, studying them, and they're going to be in an even more dangerous position exactly because they have accrued infamy for this feat that they have accomplished miraculously, right? And you now have like a perfect excuse for like, all right, the BBEG knows about them now for what they accomplished and what they did. He's going to send, their organization after them for either vengeance or at the very least, reconnaissance, information gathering. And he'll have much more in-depth knowledge and understanding of them, because that's obviously one of the biggest things about D&D in terms of like a BBEG, right? Where it's like a lot of the time your party starts out lower level, not really well known, kind of just like, fledglings, and they move up. And obviously the BBEG of your campaign is usually a pretty infamous or pretty powerful individual of like some renown at the very least, if not high renown, depending on how you do it. He could be like, a shadow puppet master or whatever, but he might also be, very powerful and well known, but he doesn't know the party, right? And he doesn't understand what threat they actually can pose to him, really. In this scenario, that takes away a pretty huge part of like any generic, or not generic, but any usual D&D party's biggest, one of their biggest positive attributes is the element of surprise and that they can take their time to build up their power to become a much more formidable threat due to their ability to, evolve, level up and grow. Whereas in this situation, the BBEG is already like, that this particular slight cannot stand. Like he's already been made hyper aware of them and will therefore take steps accordingly to more so trip them up or directly oppose them at an earlier time, which could be a very interesting, fascinating narrative, in my opinion. But specifically, we kind of shifted a little bit to that in terms of that particular topic. That in essence, though, is another, I think, aspect of jumping kind of straight into a campaign right away without a lot of prep, right? Where you have this one idea, you put a lot of your eggs in one basket, something happens, but then there are a multitude of ways for you to still spin it. You don't have to feel like you need to place all your bets on this one option, this one thing here. And I know that it's difficult, right? Because it's difficult to be creative. It's difficult to think of or come up with other stuff, especially when it's like that kind of situation also can have the effect of taking the wind out of your sails, right? It's not even necessarily like you can't come up with another idea for how to keep the game going, but it's also just like you had your heart set on kind of it unfolding this way, and then it didn't, and then you're just kind of like, man.
Like, what do I do now?
Yeah, even though it's like there are plenty of options, but it's more so about the feeling you get when you're just like, well, that didn't go the way I wanted it to, and it can be demoralizing. And I would say, again, please, GMs, if you're going to go into it, any new GMs, like don't get too hung up in trying to tell a specific type of narrative. Again, the best advice I could probably give any new GMs just off the cuff, or off the top, is the best way to condition your mind for GMing a D&D campaign is to you're trying to have fun with your friends and the people you're here with. That is the ultimate goal above anything else. It's not about the story. The story can be really fun, and I would hope that the people you're involved with, like you've talked with them, you've had a session 0, you've been like, hey, here's kind of the idea that I'm thinking of really doing. Like, here's the kind of game that I want to run, right? And then by that point, hopefully your friends would be like, yeah, we're down to run that kind of campaign. That sounds like a lot of fun. And we want to add on to that. Like, we want to be a part of that type of campaign, right? And so they're not hopefully causing too much of a disruption to the general consensus of what type of campaign you're really trying to create together. But in the off chance that something happens, maybe you weren't as communicative or clear as, maybe necessary to get the point across. Maybe a person just, how they have fun, or how the group rather has fun, is different. It's like, hey, that's okay. It's okay that things didn't necessarily go exactly the way that you planned. In fact, that's kind of the essence of one of the most fun parts of the game, right? That's why you roll dice. That's the point of it. The potential, what is the word I'm looking for? The probability or the possibility of failure. There is no guarantee. Sometimes there can be. Sometimes I would even advocate there should be a guarantee of certain things. But also, one of the funnest parts is that you can make certain things not guaranteed. It's not just your completely own written story. It's a group of individuals narratively creating this story together, with the added element of random chance to continue to spice things up, right? And so you can think of it like that, where it's like, all right, you know what? That is part of the game. And now, I don't know about you guys, I don't know about you, Sam, but that's also part of one thing that I like as a GM as well, is like, all right, something did not go the way I expected it to, and now what can I do as a response to respond and react to this new occurrence, that I didn't necessarily expect to happen. admittedly though, I guess with myself, is I also, to be fair, I also am the type of nerd who I spend tons of time, researching lore, monsters, making characters that might never ever see the light of day ever, but still like playing them out and like learning all of their abilities and features as best as I can, and having just basically kind of almost an innate backlog of useless information for if any of those potential situations come into play, right? And not everybody is like that. Not everybody can do that or wants to do that. And so it can make it a little bit harder to respond, on off the cuff or improvised, in a situation when you don't maybe have all of the same reference or material to pull from. But
that kind of comes with the territory.
It kind of comes with it. It kind of comes with the territory. And I guess overall, like me, devil's advocating for just jumping in there, like just jumping in there, legs first, head first, whatever. Just committing fully to it, even when you don't necessarily have a particularly solid foundation in it. It still has a high percentage, a high probability to be a lot of fun for you and your friends, depending on how you want to do it, right? Even if you don't even really know how the rules go, you can learn as you go, right? Like it'll just take a bit of time, but if you guys really have the interest to do it, like just do it, get in there, start something. And then as you go, you can begin to learn more, get better at it, and begin to define how you like to play the game, right? And then you learn more, and then you're able to refine your play style, your GM style, to where you become much more adept at this. It becomes smooth. It becomes far less clunky and chaotic. And even again, in that chaotic, you still have fun with that. You still have those memories that you had when you first started. You were just like, wow, geez, like, as much as me and Sam kind of talk about how much of a insane, crazy kind of like trash fire our first experiences were, like I still have some of the most incredible memories from that campaign. Like again, I told you guys about it, I think before, about like my sorcerer and my friends barbarians, exploits in the arena. That's from that first ever campaign. That was insane and crazy, but that will always live on in my memory as one of the most amazing experiences that I had in my D&D career. And so, it's like, again, just get in there. It's, in my opinion, I feel it's better to just essentially, what's that term? When you just pull the trigger, you just get in there. You don't think about it. You just you just drop in there. There's a specific term for it. But I cannot for the life of me think about it right now. Either way, I think it's better to essentially just throw too much caution to the wind and just try. Get in there initially, and if you make some mistakes, that's okay. Everybody's going to. Even when you're a GM who's played for 30 years, you're still going to make some mistakes here or there. It happens. There's a lot of stuff about this game. It can get complicated, and it can be, even then, but I would say you would have a much higher % chance of enjoying things and stuff if you just get in there. And I will say, I think maybe there are some people who might like put the caveat of like, okay, if you're a player and you just throw caution to the wind and you go in there and you expect to have fun, and it's with a group of people who are like super horrible, right? And then it's like you lose all taste or interest in the game because you had that one bad experience. To that, I would say that once again, you're throwing too much of your eggs in one basket, right? It's like, don't base the entire thing of the game off of your one bad experience that you had, right? Like we absolutely here at the Arcane Archive advocate for the belief that no D&D is better than bad D&D, because it is just a fact. It's just true. Another thing to realize though is that like you still got experience, right? You went in there, you found out what you definitely don't like, and you now have the ability to hopefully at least pick out those red flags or those indicators of maybe poor group dynamic for you. But that shouldn't necessarily stop you though from trying with a different group, you know? Like, I get it. It's like, don't assume that whatever group you get involved with, like what they do is like the default or norm of a TTRPG group, because I've read numerous, like endless stories about people who got involved like as a first-time player with a group of people who were like, clearly, if you had any experience, like they were clearly toxic and not cool or not great at all. But they made the assumption, it's like, oh, I just thought, everybody was like this. I just thought that this was just what it was like. And it's like, well, you don't have any other reference to pull from for that. This is your first ever experience. So until you have another party that you join to experience, please do not assume that this behavior, this toxic or bad behavior, just is the norm. Like, if you're not having fun, attempt to discuss it with your GM, let them know, like, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not really enjoying the game for whatever reasons that you can give. And if they are a good GM, then they will do their best to kind of respond to that in a reasonable fashion. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk a bit about it. Let's see if we can't maybe hopefully adjust or address, the issues you're having and fix them and make it so that you can have a good time. If they're not really willing to, if they're calling you like a wuss or a coward or like, whatever else, if they're like actively ridiculing you or punishing you because you're not like getting with the program, then absolutely you should leave. Like, that is not a group that you should be a part of. You should just leave and find a different group and try your best to do that. Because believe me, I have been a part of numerous groups, and a number of them have not been perfect. A number of them have been pretty bad, and a number of them have been pretty damn good too, And Sam himself, he has been lucky to be a part of a couple of groups for years. And they're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they're still pretty damn good. The fact that they have lasted together this long, that is an impressive feat. And so, that being the case, that's what I would say to new players getting involved in a game is, do not assume that your first experience is automatically the gospel experience for every, TTRPG group. At the very least, try one more, right? Give it another shot. If you really want it, if you really had an interest in it and really wanted to try and experience it, give it a shot. Don't hate the game, right? In this particular sense, don't hate the game, hate those players / GM, right? Because those are the guys that were being assholes to you.
Yeah.
And so it's important to never put your eggs, for both GMs and players, don't ever overcommit to this one thing in this game, because it's hardly ever really the truth or really the case. But with that, we can move on to another particular topic of specifically, again, GMing.
Real quick, Adam.
Yeah.
If we could pause for just a moment, I have to check on my dog real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just make sure he's good.
We'll be back in just a second while Sam has to take a bit of an emergency break real quick. Thank you guys so much. That's probably important. All right. We'll be back in a little bit, y'all. Hang on one second. And welcome back, everybody. Sorry about that. Had to take us a quick little short break there. Everything okay, Sammy?
Yeah, he's an old boy who is starting to go blind, and he doesn't know when he has to go to the bathroom, and I have to go out there with him, and he still didn't do anything. But I just had to get him walk. I have to get him to move. If I don't do anything, he won't move all day.
Gotta get a little bit of exercise. Never hurts.
Yeah.
But despite the fact we all love doggos and kitties here, let's go ahead and get back on topic. I want to specifically ask Sam, like, what are some of your thoughts or ideas on how, we've talked a little bit already about how, like, kind of just get into it or build a foundation with a module. But what do you think might be a decent way for a person to maybe start creating some of their own homebrew worlds and ideas and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, it's funny because, as much as we talk about stuff like this, you really can kind of look at the DMG as like a not
Guideline.
it is. It's almost like it's there for a reason.
Yeah.
All of the things in the book, whether it's the map of your campaign, what factions are present, how magic works, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those things are important, but for me, at least from a starting point, is really just come up with a couple cities, just based on looks and how they act alone. So there's a large elven area where there's a couple cities. Okay, what differentiates each city from each other? Those, and like, what are the names? Find names for everything, even if it's a placeholder. Every city has a name, and just map out in your head, or not in your head, but like write down geographically what each of these places could look like. So basics. I'm talking complete basics. So, for example, Dwarven City, where instead of nestled on a mountain, it's underneath kind of like a crag that comes outward. So now you have, okay, this is what it looks like. Why are they there, and what makes this city different from other Dwarven cities? That's all you have to do to start with, I think would be my starting point.
Okay.
So come up, is it royalty based, or is it just, is it an elected official? Come up with stuff like that. So what type of government is it? Because that I know it sounds dumb and uninteresting, but it can be important. Ththese things are important.
It usually can be. Yeah,
you look at every major city in established places like Sword Coast. Each one functions differently. Each person who is the ruler or head of that city has a different reason for being there. So it's about the basics. You come up with the basics first. So what does this city do? What are its exports? What is it known for? How do the people there act? Do they act just like a normal? Is it normal city, or is there something that makes it different? I've seen instances of people talk about like, oh, it's a city full of gnomes and halflings where their work culture is like 16 hours a day. They work 5 days a week, and then the last 2 days of the week, it is party zone.
It is party central.
Nothing works as the way it's supposed to.
Yep.
Everything's gone to shit. Everyone's drunk all the time. So, but that's different than every other society around it, where it's like, well, for a couple days, the farmers are really busy. And then the next couple days, when they're not working, well, they have to get their tools fixed. So now all the smithies are in full force. No, this town has its own culture that makes it different. So now, do that for a couple big cities. I would say do at least a big city and a smaller settlement city for each main group of people. Obviously, you're going to have cities with a bunch of mixed populations with a bunch of different people. But if you have a couple cities on the map that are primarily one group of people, whether that's elves, dwarves, orcs, humans,
goblins,
dragonborn, I would say make one big city for each of those groups that you want to have a big part of your story, right? Or just you want this to be a part of your campaign. You want to have a big city full of dragonborn somewhere. Okay, well, make sure you have what makes their society different than the other societies on your table. Even, again, nothing specific, just baseline stuff. Baseline stuff that you could, off the top, tell people if they have like a baseline question for you in your game. The less time you have to look at your notes, the better, in my opinion. The faster you can tell people, hey, this is some basic information that you know. And then if they want to find out more stuff, then you can kind of, okay, go find some books. And then as they find some books, you go through your notes and you're like, all right, well, these are the things you find out. Okay, so you start there, you have your couple cities. All right, where are they? What kind of environment would you find these places in? Okay, now I'm not going to say you have to go off of how geological formations work in the real world, because this is fantasy.
Yeah, you do not. But you absolutely do not.
I think there is something to be said about where something is located versus what they're good at. So something's in the mountains, most likely they're mining. Or some other like
crystals.
Maybe it's magic research, and being close to the stars allows them to do weird stuff.
That's true too.
Again, you're gonna have a city full of elves that don't eat meat and love, nature. Don't put them in the desert. That's a weird place to put them, unless they used to be like that and things went badly, and now they're a whole different weird desert tribe of elves. That's cool. That's a cool thing to do.
Yeah,
But
I was
again,
gonna say they could be a desert tribe of elves.
that's why. But see, that cool idea is that's why you want to think of where these places are, and what, because of where they are, what does that mean for
What
them?
does that mean? What effect does that have on their
Because,
culture and as a whole?
I mean, look, if you're gonna put a city on a large body of water like an ocean or a river or even just a large lake, that body of water is now intrinsic to its existence. As much as you want to say, well, they don't need water, they can get it from somewhere, but societally,
why would they though?
that water is important.
Yeah,
Whether it's for commerce, whether it's for trade, whether it's for access to fresh water, all of these things
it's most
are
the reason why that settlement was made in the first place.
thank you.
And so like the river and the the lake or whatever.
For me, I pull that stuff from the fact that I love history. I like history, so I've looked at why are these places where they are. And to me that's interesting, because if it wasn't like that, our whole history would be different. Whether or not people want to admit that, that's fine, but the reality is, I think the best way to do it, if you're trying to build something from scratch, you need a couple of big settlements, names, what they're known for, who lives there. That's it, really. Once you get to that point, you can change things like, how their societies are structured, who's in charge. Those are things you can kind of come up with as you go. Because you could say, oh, well, that one has a royal family. You could tell your campaign that, your party members, but they don't know that royal family. So realistically speaking, you have time to come up with that before they get there. So I would say,
I mean, it depends. Obviously, it would probably pretty public knowledge who the royal family or lineage would be. But, to be fair,
but maybe they're not an open society. That's also something that, like, these are things you can choose. Of course, there's a big sort of republic of cities that everyone knows about and everyone can go to, but there are most likely going to be places on your map that not everyone is allowed to go into, or it's kept a little more hush hush, or the people that go
they're a bit more secluded.
They don't
secluded community.
People don't tend to migrate there and then come back. People go there and then that's where they live, and you don't really know why. And whether it's because it's a religious society that doesn't allow certain outside things, think like Vasselheim in Critical Role, where like they were very like, you can't do these things.
No, yeah, they are very single-minded in a lot of ways.
People really didn't go back and forth from there. Either you lived there, or maybe you brought stuff there to trade and then you were gone. You did not stay there. And those are things, again, you have to kind of think of reasons why these places are the way they are. It doesn't have to be deep reasoning. It really doesn't. It can be, oh, this town is known for it's a dwarven town known for its smithing. Why? Well, they're in a mountain and it's full of precious metals. And they've always been good at that. And they've always done that. And everyone knows that. And then you add personality to it. You add, well, they're a little bit gruff. They will trade with other people, but for the most part, the only thing they trade for is food. They don't trade for anything else. You could bring precious metals there, they don't care. They already have it. Unless you bring something that they really can't find, they won't even give you the time of day. It's little things like that where you add in.
I would say a great way to be able to like come up with, personality traits of an entire, even like kind of culture, is make a character.
Yeah, that's also a good way to do it.
Make a character. What character would you find interesting to play as, and then just literally take that character's personality, and you can't make necessarily every single like inhabitant have that exact same personality, but you can take one trait, right? Hopefully, I would hope that you would make a multifaceted, multidimensional character, and take like one aspect of that character and make it more of a racial or a cultural aspect of this group of individuals, this group of people here, this community. And like Sam said, maybe they're gruff. Maybe all of them inexplicably, for whatever, they love sweets, right? They love sweet things.
It's simple stuff, but it makes so much difference.
It's like a thing that all these dwarves, they are suckers for anything sweet. You got like pudding, chocolate, vanilla something, whatever it is, honey. Like whatever it is, it's like, they're kind of maybe gruff and not super social. And then as soon as you pull out something sweet, they're like, oh, what did he got there? Ooh, oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And
yes, let's go. It's
funny because that simple thing that
Just
one thing
one little
can now explain a bunch of reasons they act the way they act.
Yeah.
So now you have a
or
whole
gives a dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
It can flip the script completely on its head,
you have
right?
a whole society of people who for all intents and purposes, are a wealthy society full of precious metals, craftsmanship. They make crazy stuff, but they don't have great farmland, so they only trade for food. But if you bring food and maybe things like cocoa or honey or things that they can't produce, all of a sudden these traders, you notice you come into the city and there are certain traders being treated a lot better than everyone else. And
Like-
it's because of what they bring. So
Like,
these
yeah.
people are now important to the society on a different level than, say, your party would be.
You're introducing a completely new element into their entire community. Again, like Sam said, like take it for on a mountain, right? They probably don't have a lot of ready access to things like cotton or wheat or like much else, really. Again, they deal primarily in rock or stone,
Even
minerals.
lumber they could probably get away with as well.
Even lumber, there's tree, but probably not a ton overall. You know, they would still primarily be highly dependent upon harder, denser materials. And so you bring them these other materials here, and or at least you introduce it. That gives, like Sam just said, instills an interest in the party, and would also then in turn instill interest from the party to interact in this way. Like you can give traits to a vast community of people, because that is a completely normal thing, even in the real world. You live in a certain community, everyone just kind of naturally picks up certain mannerisms or traits that everyone shares. Now, nobody is exactly the same person as anybody else, because at the end of the day, we're all individuals. But there are absolutely similarities that everyone does share growing up and having the same similar kind of experiences. And therefore, I mean, hell, you don't necessarily even have to create a character. Why don't you just take a person from your real life that you know? Everybody's got a few of those kind of wacky, crazy people, or that have some kind of interesting traits that you find, you know, that kind of set them apart. Take some of that and apply them into this community of individuals and people. I definitely love that particular aspect that you said about, like, one of the best ways to start is by, you know, establish a couple of communities, cities, towns, whatever areas of people, establish, you know, why they're kind of there, at least, and not even necessarily why, but like, you know, where are they geographically located? If they're located here, then they probably have this particular interest or this particular, like, you know, commodity, all that stuff. Another thing that I like to do as well is, like, I mean, and this is just me personally, like, I also like to establish, like, pantheons. Like, that's another thing that, like, I would say would be a good thing to maybe start off with as well, specifically because this game relies so heavily upon those beings specifically, right? And here's the thing, you, of course, there is absolutely nothing wrong with taking established pantheons from other mediums, right? From D&D itself, 5th edition, to the Egyptian pantheon, to the Nordic pantheon, to the Greek pantheon, whatever bit of gods that you want to use, you can kind of take. But if you want to create your own personal pantheon, which I have, and it's a lot of fun in my opinion, because you can literally just come up with a god for anything. Literally anything. You could be like, oh, there's a god for people who love hot chocolate, right? There's a hot chocolate god, because of how much people just love hot chocolate. Because you don't even have to have, like, a super in-depth thing about gods, because gods by their very nature are kind of intrinsically unknowable to a certain extent. But, you know, just have something, I would say, if you want to create your own personal pantheon, have the basics, right? There's probably a god of the sea. There's probably, like, you know, you could make, however, elements, you can make elementals, right? You could just make elementals, the so-called gods of the elements. But there's probably a goddess or a god of love, of war, of, like, agriculture, of whatever. Because, like, you can specifically even utilize, let's say, the clerics, the clerics domains, right? Is like, you can specifically, like, look through the cleric domains and be like, okay, I can maybe at least establish a couple of gods for these domains. For like, again, in case somebody does play a cleric, right? I do know there are a couple of people who like they have established gods, but they don't necessarily have their clerics necessarily intrinsically tied to them. Their clerics kind of like get their magic from kind of just a single source that every kind of magic user gets their magic from. And like, while I'm like, okay, that's fine too. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. I personally am a very strong believer. Like, I like the different types and sources of magic that you can get depending on what your class is, right?
Yeah.
I like the differences. I like the diversity. Yeah, the personal relation, or even the diversity of magic, of where it's like, if you're a divine caster, you get it from this source. If you're a more natural caster, you get it from this source. If you're an arcane caster, these are the different sources that you can get it from, based off of what type of magic and or even how you choose to manifest your magic, you know? And so with that in mind, it's like another thing also in regards to the gods is like, gods are active, right? For me, I'm also a person, I love showcasing that gods are active because it gives you so much freedom in how you can affect and interact with the world, or even show a certain effect or interact. Like you can do such miraculous things that don't necessarily have to be logical or rational per se, right? And if you set a precedent for the gods being active in your world, like, I think that's cool, because at the end of the day, they're also still creatures and beings that are under a certain set of rules of engagement, but with the ability to make it more grandiose and you know, intensely magical. I like those epic high fantasy kind of things. Like that's always been my thing too. So that would be one of my things as well to focus on when you would first want to start creating your own homebrew setting, is, you know, come up with a couple of gods in your, and you don't even have to make them specific gods of anything, right? You can just make them like, they are all gods and they all have certain powers or abilities or whatever. And you don't even have to like specify their things like immediately. Like, you might only have to do that again if you have more divine type clasters, like a paladin or a cleric would be the only, or like, you know, a divine soul sorcerer or a celestial warlock. Like, again, if they have a deliberate connection to one of these gods in some way, then you'd have to be like, okay, well, this god, there is a specific god for this type of domain or for this type of concept or thing or whatever. Because it is more intrinsically tied to even the mechanics of the game, specifically in conjunction with the players. And so it's important, in my opinion, to have those particular aspects, because again, it'd be cool to interact with the players on that manner, right? To be like, hey, this is an entity that you can interact with that provides them with much more role play opportunity and connection and interaction. Let's see, what would be some other aspects that would probably be in terms of creating your own homebrew world? Oh, obviously, probably one of the biggest things, we talked about this a little later or a little earlier, excuse me, would be as upfront and like straightforward with your players about your homebrew rules, right? If you're making a homebrew campaign, then you gotta be as straight up and communicative and informative to your players about how you run the game. Like, what are homebrew rules that you use, right? And for me, for instance, like, I have a number of them kind of just like eked out. Like, you know, for me, anytime I run a game, I specifically stipulate, like in session 0, like, hey, 1, you know, we utilize the homebrew rule of like, you can use potions as a bonus action. It's not a full action. You are able to cast leveled spells so long as you have the action economy for it. You're not restricted in that particular regard. In the event of nat 20s and natural 1s, I usually like to go with like natural 20s and natural 1s. Natural 20s, you will, at least for saves and attack rolls, you will always succeed. Not for checks, but for saves and attack rolls. Like, if you are trying to save from an effect that is happening to you and you have no real way of actually saving from it, I feel like that leaves too many opportunities for the game to become like, for that player, it's like you just shut them down and they no longer can do anything or have fun. Like again, if you have a player who like, you know, has low wisdom, right? And you're going to constantly cast hold person on them, right? And they become paralyzed. They literally just lose all their turns. They can't do anything. Like they have no way of getting out of there. If they can't even natural 20 get out of that spell or that effect, they have no way of escaping.
Yeah.
Like they are effectively just trapped and done for a full minute unless the person who's holding concentration loses concentration on the spell. And that kind of sucks. That's not super fun. At least with the natural 20, it's like, okay, you do have an opportunity to push beyond your limits to break free of this effect that is forcibly affecting you. I feel like that's fair. I like that. I think that you should have that. I think same thing for like an enemy, for instance, if it's like their save is too high for them to possibly fail, but you're trying to do a last-ditch effort to affect them with this ability. Well, they rolled a natural 1. And so their defenses have miraculously like crumbled to the point where they can be affected by this thing now. Again, miraculously, because that's, you know, I feel like it's a fantasy world. Those points and those moments should be able to happen, because otherwise it's just like, well, this is a literal mechanic that is designed to, again, give at least some amount of possibility of success or failure. Then you should always have that potential for success or failure there anyway. Otherwise, you shouldn't even roll, obviously.
Yeah, I mean,
so like
talked about that many times.
Yeah, so that's why it's like I feel like having natural 20s and natural 1s affect saves is good, affects attack rolls is good, and specifically in regards to attack rolls, I usually, on the event of a nat 1, or rather, I'll even say 20, on the event of a natural 20 crit, I also implement the homebrew rule of heroic crits, where you specifically get the max amount of dice for start, and then you roll again. So whatever your dice pool is, you get the maximum number you could possibly get with all the dice in your pool, and then you roll again and add it to that for your crit damage. That way, you avoid situations where you roll a 20 and then you double your dice, you know, and then you roll 1s on all your dice, and it's like less than it could have been had you not got a crit at all. Like that is one of the worst feelings ever, where you're just like, you finally rolled a natural 20 on an attack roll, and you rolled you rolled comparatively less damage than you probably could have had you not gotten a crit anyway.
Yeah.
Like that is a sour, horrible feeling. And so for me, I'm like, you know what? We're going to make it so that you can, no matter what, even regardless of what you roll for damage, you will always still deal more than like the maximum amount of damage that you would have had you rolled. You will always have that at the very least. And then conversely, though, with natural 1s on attacks, you do have the potential for mishaps that can happen based off the situation. And these are, again, like, I don't like to do the critical fumble tables. I don't like those. I think they can be far too overly punishing, in my opinion, in really not unbalanced ways. So usually what I do is I usually make it more situational in terms of like, hey, you're firing an arrow or a ranged spell attack at an enemy that one of your party members is currently engaged with. You roll a nat 1, you have a chance of hitting your party member, your teammate at that point, because that is also how real world works. If you're trying to like shoot somebody with something or hit anybody with a ranged thing, and you have your friend who is engaged, like punching them or rolling, like it's hard to get a good beat on a person when they're in the middle of a melee because you have a chance of hitting your friend.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I feel like that is a fair thing. So you have to choose strategically whether or not it's worth it to try and hit this creature that's currently like, you know, engaged with your boy or your girl right there, as opposed to trying to attack somebody else who isn't currently engaged in like, you know, melee combat. That's just the risk that you run with that. For melee, I usually do things like if you roll a nat 1 on a melee strike, you could maybe hit another person. I don't really like the idea of like you hit yourself with your own melee attack. I feel like that doesn't always really make a lot of sense to me. I know people who have done it and I'm like, okay, I guess that's fine. Like, but for me, it's more so you roll a nat 1, you're going to like fall prone or like get like the effect of like the essentially similar to like being flat footed in older editions where it's like you overcommitted to the strike, you missed, and now you've left yourself open for like a reprisal, right? where like the enemy might get like advantage on you for like one attack, or if you fall prone, you're prone and he'll get advantage on you on the ground because you slipped or tripped or something like that. Is that's usually what because again, I feel like, again, if a nat 20 should have an effect, like a bonus effect and stuff that actually should matter, then so should a nat 1 as a means of balancing the equation. And this happens for both enemies and players. And so even then, that balances out like that, in my opinion. So basically, like, things like that, be upfront with your players as best as you can, because you might not always remember every homebrew rule that you might do, but you want to try your best to avoid at any point where like something like this comes up and then you're like, oh yeah, no, actually this is how I do it in my game here. And you basically spring that on your players, right? You want to do your best to keep from just like springing, random rules onto your players that they were not previously aware of, because then that makes them start to feel like you're just changing things to suit yourself all willy-nilly.
Yeah, which is never...
It's never great, and you want to do your best to avoid that at all costs as best as you possibly can. Let's see. Another aspect for like, beginner GMs that might be important. You don't, and this might honestly just be for beginner anybody's, actually, whether they're players or GMs. We've talked a little bit about this before, I believe, but you don't have to have like a ton of different voices or accents ready and prepared for like every NPC that you play, or for your player character even, like you shouldn't need to be too hung up on that particular aspect to restrict you from playing or GMing the game. It's like, it's okay. There's plenty of GMs who they don't really have a lot of different accent ability or like, vocal range, and they kind of just talk in the same voice for all of their, NPCs. And that's all right. There's nothing wrong with that.
It is. And like, I think it's more about inflection in the effort you put in, not necessarily the accents you have.
You can change up their personality, right? How they speak, the cadence of their speech, the tone, like Sam said, the speed at which they kind of interact, or even just, again, their personality. Some people might be more shy, some people might be more verbose, some people might be more deadpan, and whatever. And it's like, you just, you can still bring life to your NPCs and your player characters without having to, give a specific change to like, an accent or a particular, inflection of your voice, if you whatever you need to. It's still cool when you can, of course. And I still feel like it wouldn't be a bad thing at all to like maybe practice or try, because you also, I know a lot of people feel hesitant to try doing accents because they're like, oh, I'm going to butcher it and people are going to make fun of me for it. It's like, well, guess what? You don't have to do an accent of the real world. That accent you're making, that's the accent of this person's culture or race in this world. So you can't say that it's wrong or bad, because that's how they sound in this world. You know what I mean? Like, and I know some people are gonna be like, yeah, what? It's like it's a made up game, bro. You're playing freaking elves and dragonborn and orcs or whatever. Like, who says that they don't sound like this?
Yeah,
we're not French here. We're not Indian here. We're not freaking black or Asian, whatever. Like, it's like
anyone can sound like anything.
Anyone can sound like anything, and it would be totally fine and normal. Like, you can't say that it is wrong or it is an incorrect accent. Like, and so I would say that for new players and GMs, try your best to keep that in mind. It's not wrong, okay? It is your attempt at giving this character more individuality and personal flavor traits, which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
What about you, Sam? Any other things that you kind of wanted to touch upon or talk about in regards for new GMs and I guess also new players, I suppose, in certain situations?
I think there is something that people should think about especially if you're making your own world. is how present magic is in that world. We like to take advantage. We like to take for granted the fact that the
So this
players
is a good
can
one.
the
Yeah.
players can have all these magical abilities and items and things, and that if that's not the norm, then that's going to cause a lot of things to happen in your world. I like to think of magic as a tool. So and if anytime I'm doing a homebrew world, magic usually has a place in normal society. It's not understood by everyone, but for the most part, anyone with a semblance of an education in a urban environment knows a little bit about magic. They might not know the specifics on how it's cast, or maybe not how everything works, but they damn well know what it looks like.
And they know it exists for certain.
Because things like, you look at, how the hell are these cities being built? They don't have, they don't have big machines and things. How are they building these giant castles and things? Well, you could say, well, it's manual labor. It's people who learned how to do this the hard way. Well, there's no reason in a magical society that those things, while they still would require manual labor, couldn't
Absolutely.
also, instead of having someone mix cement by hand,
It could be augmented by magic.
why isn't there a fledgling wizard who works with the construction people, who works with those laborers that build large buildings? Because one, it's easy money if you're a wizard that is in need of money.
Yep.
Two, it makes things go way faster. And so you can have cities that maybe didn't exist 10 years ago and are now a giant metropolis because of things like magic. Now, what I always like to do is, in small towns, in rural farming villages and places like that, the only magic they might be familiar with is like druidic magic or ranger magic, the natural magics, or maybe there's a cleric in town, but they might not be familiar with the arcane magic. They might have never seen someone blow up a building with a fireball before.
Fireball, yeah.
And so I think, it's something to think about when you're making a setting. How would people react to magic or magic implements or weird monsters, things that are intrinsically magical in nature? Because I think a lot of that stuff is telling. There might be a trade society that is very familiar with magical objects, but maybe isn't as familiar with how those objects are used. They know how to identify them. Maybe they have people that are good at figuring out their worth, but they might not necessarily understand how to use them. And that's okay. Whereas on the other hand, if you have a farming village in the middle of nowhere, or a fishing village out in the coast that rarely has interaction with other people, and your party walks in and 4 of them can shoot fire out of their damn hands, that might attract attention. And I think that's something to be said. You have a big city with a giant arena where people fight and do competitions. Of course they're going to know what magic is. But on the other hand, you have a small town in the middle of nowhere. Someone might be doing magic as an entertainment that people have never seen before. And to your party, that's basic magic. Yeah. That's super easy. Most of these are cantrips. But to these people,
if they're in a real rural area, they don't have much exposure to that.
That's really that's amazing. The fact that this person can do that. Whether you use that as a way to swindle people or not is up to you and your party. But the reality is that you have to think of, I compare magic to technology.
Yep. That's a great
in today's day and age.
It's a perfect comparison in a lot of ways.
You go down into the Bible Belt, you go to Mississippi, there's still people living with dirt floors.
Oh yeah,
in their houses.
I mean, that's the thing. Like
they don't have windows. They don't have heat. They use wood burning stoves, and that's not a bad thing. No, they choose to live that way. That's fine. Whether it's sometimes it is unfortunate because it's from poverty, but that's also that. There you go. That's still works for a setting. They aren't you hand them an iPhone. They're not going to know what to do with that. They might have heard of it. They might know it exists.
They most likely know of it,
but they have probably not held one in their hands before.
Yeah.
Give them a laptop. They're probably the only computer half these people have seen are the old blocky yellowish computers you would see at a public library 20 years ago. As much as that's the comparison. These small
I
towns
agree.
might only see magic when they bring their goods to the nearest large settlement to make sure they have enough of each thing for the winter. That might be the only time they encounter someone who has any kind of magic capability.
Yeah, no,
So
it's a big world,
so
and you
things
can
like,
make it bigger if you want. Like,
yeah, but things like a druid taking up residence nearby a town, or a wizard seemingly out of nowhere, or erecting a tower. That those are way more important events for small towns and settlements than they would be for a large city. So I think that's something to think about: is how prevalent is magic? Does everyone know about magic? Is it present in every aspect of everyone's day, or is it like technology where things have to spread? People have to learn about them and bring them to new places. Um, so I think that's something that people should think about when doing a setting. Not every society is going to treat magic the same way.
nope.
Dwarves are like, in terms of what is lore bound in actual D&D lore, dwarves are historically not adverse to magic,
They're not
but they
fans of
keep
it though.
but they only have very specialized groups. So you'll have in like a dwarven city where there's royalty, there will be a sect of their guard forces that are all sorcerers, or they're
Yep.
all wizards. They're
Wizards. Yep.
trained magic practitioners, but that's it. It's just this group. There's
Yep.
no
No.
random guy you're going to meet, random dwarf in the street that does magic. That's just not part of their society.
Yeah, it's usually much more tailored to like their smiths, like their enchanter smiths, or bodyguards, or people of higher station that would be magical in nature.
Whereas you can assume in an elven society, there's a lot of people that know nature magics just because of their close proximity
I mean,
to
elves
those things.
are, and not just that, but
Yes, that's true.
their intrinsic tie to like elves are just literally magical.
Yeah.
High elves get access to a cantrip. Like,
so
you know,
that their society,
from birth.
magic is far more prevalent.
Yeah.
Especially because they're long lived. They might just at a whim learn magic. And that's or it's in their bloodline. They don't have a choice. They just know how to do it.
Yeah, they just know how to do it.
Again, that's something that you have to think about, especially when you start making your own civilizations, especially when you're making your own factions from scratch, where you're like, well, maybe I'll use some points from this, but I want to do it myself. I think magic is something that you have to think about.
I agree.
And even if you choose and you're like, hey, you know what? This is a low magic setting.
I was gonna say I've
magicians are extremely rare.
Yeah, I've played in a couple of like low magic settings where it's like almost non-existent and people just don't really know anything about it.
So now if you're in a low magic setting, okay. Ingredients for things, you're never going to find them. Magic items, few and far between. People who actually know how to cast magic and know how it works, that is like an invaluable resource to a nation.
Yeah, literally.
One wizard goes from being, it's a wizard, it's worth like 10, 20 guys on a battlefield. Well, now that wizard is worth an army. Because no one else knows how to do
No one else knows how to do that.
And an old wizard book that you find in a ruin in a normal magic society, it's worth a couple hundred gold pieces if it has anything valuable in it. Now in a low magic setting,
invaluable.
That is worth
priceless.
Hordes of gold.
It's priceless. You're not even gold. So, it's priceless.
Again, those are things that you have to think about when making your world. Similar to what you were talking about with the Pantheon, is how present the gods are. For me,
magic, yeah.
For me, when I think of the pantheons that you were talking about before, the reason I don't have a pantheon is I just pick a couple gods that each society would have temples of, and if you believe in another god, it exists, but there might not be a temple for it where you're looking, and you might have to start your own. Who knows? But that's the way I do it. Is similar to magic. Is it prevalent, or is it more of a rare occurrence? Because that'll also change what your players can play as class wise. What you want them to like, because it's okay to put restrictions.
Yeah.
It's okay to say, hey, 4 of you want to be sorcerers. That's not really going to work, because if 4 of you are sorcerers, you're going to be imprisoned by the first large town you meet, and they are going to study you.
I mean, to be fair, that would be pretty funny and interesting. Though.
It would be.
Like that. That would be.
And like if you're a DM that's confident in how you could spin that to even work, go for it. I would love to have people who are intrinsically magic play in a low magic setting where they have to hide the fact that they can do magic.
You basically would be like the X-Men, in Marvel Comics, where you'd be like mutants almost, where like you are intrinsically capable of this thing that very few, if basically no one else, really is. You know what I mean? Like that sounds like a cool idea, actually. But I have, yeah,
those are things you have to think of.
I absolutely agree. Like I think that's same thing with the gods is an incredibly important like baseline step. Is yes, absolutely. Is this a high magic fantasy campaign or is this a low magic campaign? Like, you know, it's like because I played in both. Where, and as I've said multiple times, my preference, I like that high magic fantasy going on there because I feel like you can just do so much more cool, interesting thing because it is exactly like technology. You can, like, and even then, you can make you can go even the next step and be like, yo, artificers exist in your world, meaning that they have built technological things, but they're usually more powered by magic. It's like a literal conglomeration or is that the right word, conglomeration? Maybe I was meant to say amalgamation. It's an amalgamation of magic and technology together to make a really cool, you know, fantasy-esque version of technology. You know, I love the concept of like flying ships, right? Or even flying cities and stuff like that. Like I like that. That's cool. Because it also gives you the ability to go beyond what our, you know, real life present day technology is really capable of, right? With the added essence of magic. However, devil's advocate, on the other hand, you know, with a low magic setting, you also give your players who want to do magic, you give them more ability to feel more like superheroes. Like, again, the X-Men from Marvel, like, you know, like they are truly special and set apart from the rest of the world and gives them an interesting, again, narrative and our RP potential. And that, yeah, like Sam said, maybe you have to kind of hide it. Otherwise, you're going to have some negative repercussions or at the very least concerning repercussions for, yeah, they might want to experiment on you. They might see you as a threat and want to get rid of you because, you know, you're a witch, burn the witch, you know, whatever kind of thing or whatever. Like magic is evil or outlawed. My personal thing, though, even with that, is I also just feel like that does inflict a bit of an annoying restriction on your players, maybe for a bit, because I can definitely feel like at times, like at least for me, it is a little bit annoying because it's like you have all of these spells, and because then if you do a lower magic setting, you really do kind of have to then start to restrict a lot of stuff that you can use as a spellcaster, like, you know, create food and water, or like, you know, detect poison, whatever, like things like that would be like, oh, hey, you know, you can just do that stuff now. And so it defeats the purpose of it being like low magic, where magic, you know, can't just handle or deal with all of your problems or issues for everything and all of this stuff. And I feel at least a lot of the games that I played in anyway utilized it like that. Like in my experience, whenever it was a low magic setting, a lot of the time they did it with a more explicit intent of making it more gritty, right? Of a more like difficult survival gritty kind of. It doesn't have to be like that in it, because again, like Sam was saying, I think it'd be really cool and interesting to basically be like, yeah, I can use magic to do all this stuff now, which is crazy. But a lot of the time it is like, I think they utilize it in a sense of like, because people, it is true that magic can theoretically handle and just kind of fix a lot of like GM's ideas for like traps, encounters, obstacles, you know, all that stuff. But I feel like what a lot of GMs, both old and new, might not realize is that the fact that magic, a lot of spells have a direct counter to those situations isn't a bad thing. Like, that's the point of having those spells. The point of being magical, of being able to attack a certain obstacle or encounter or problem that you have placed in the party's path and use this particular spell to solve it, you know? I don't necessarily feel like it automatically has to be interpreted like you trivialize the encounter with magic, right? If you're doing traps and stuff, there's almost no other way that the party could possibly have survived this trap without doing that one specific thing. Like, you know, you have like a boulder that's hurling down a hallway towards you, right? All you can do is run down the corridor and maybe hopefully get away. If you're a martial class or whatever, maybe if the GM is nice, it'll be like, okay, you know what? If we're trapped, I'm gonna stand my ground and I'm gonna attempt to like destroy the boulder as it comes flying at me with my like strength or whatever, right? And then the GM might be like, all right, yeah, depending on how high you roll for this attack, you can potentially like shatter the boulder or pulverize the boulder with one strike before it's able to like crush you, right? How often, Sammy, how often do you think a GM would be willing to let you do something like that? Like,
they wouldn't, especially if the trap is designed a specific way. I think, for me personally, we've talked about this before of having the multiple avenues of progression.
yeah.
If you're, in a trap situation and it's like, well, we don't have the magic to fix this. We have martial classes. I mean, there's ways to think, it's like, okay, how can we stop the boulder? Maybe we don't have a way to destroy the boulder, but how can we stop the boulder from moving? Well, we have a big strong guy. We just get a big stick or some sort of rock or something. If we could get underneath the boulder, that's something we can try. Now, as a DM, you have to make the decision of, am I going to let them do this? Because it's a small chance that they'll actually do anything to change it. And if they fail, they'll die. Now, I would urge a DM to not put their players in that situation. I don't like the boulder rolling down the hallway trap unless you have spots in the hallway where you can run to.
Yeah.
Because if there's no way to move forward and no way to get out of the way of the boulder, what's the point of it being there? Unless there's another way they can go, why is the boulder there? So for me, it's, especially if you're going to constrict what your players can do, you have to be careful as to why you're putting it there and what you're putting there.
And that in essence is again where, magic comes into play, right? Where you're like, hey, you're stuck in a room where seemingly any mundane idea or execution of an idea is essentially not going to work, right? Oh, these what do I want to call them? These trappers, or what is a person who makes buildings and stuff? I'm forgetting the term for
architect.
Architect, thank you. These architects, I'm just like blanking on words today. These architects were so intelligent and so good at their job that they were able to seamlessly trap these would-be invaders in this area to guarantee, their deaths if by normal mundane means. Like there is no normal mundane mean for you to get out of this trap because they just did their job so well. And it's like, okay, well, then that's where, having magic comes into play and can come into play if a GM wants to play like that, right?
And I think it's fine as long as you can't just throw them in a hole and be like, well, you're in a hole now, and be like, oh, you don't have any spells? Oh, like try to plan it so that they at least have an opportunity to fix it for themselves.
I agree. Or at the very least, give them the, flexibility to try miraculous, crazy things, right? Like, again, that's another aspect, I guess, what we can get into as well is, and I know I've said this before, is give your martial classes more opportunity to be miraculous and supernatural, right? Like give them the ability to be superheroes. You know what I mean? In that scenario or example I presented earlier about the boulder and like breaking through the boulder, it's like, if you want to have a low magic setting and you want to make things like mundane and you want to give because a lot of time, again, in my experience anyway, again, it doesn't always have to be this way, but in my personal experience, and I've had a couple of these, the GM usually does that with the explicit intent of trying to weaken the spellcasters and giving them less ability to cast spells and do things and perform these kinds of supernatural, crazy, reality bending feats. And it's like, I have never been a fan ever of taking things away from players to make the game what again harder. You feel like it's more interesting because you think that is going to force them to think more outside the box or more creatively. Like, I'm still not entirely sure what those GMs feel or believe is the intention in like taking things, restricting things, and like stripping players of more options and abilities they can do in the game. It's like, I get it. It's like, okay, that ramps up the difficulty and makes things less convenient. But the problem is that then if that's the case, then you have to be more open, ironically, as a GM to allowing more things out of the realm of like realism then to get out of certain situations. Because it's like, again, okay, you take away, for instance, like the spell, I don't know, telekinesis or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
You take away, like, there's a boulder rolling down. Like before, that spellcaster could cast telekinesis to like stop the boulder in its tracks, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could pick it up or you could just telekinetically force it back or hold it there so that you don't get trampled. It's like, all right, perfect. That's great. You take that away. It's like, okay, fine. Can I cast like a fireball at it to like blow it up? It's like, well, it's a fireball, so it only does fire damage. And this thing is like immune to fire damage. Like it's a giant boulder. It's like,
yeah, it's a big rock.
Okay, can I cast like Ray of Frost on it then to like freeze it and make it like brittle or something?
No,
it's rolling super fast. Like it's not gonna like, it'll just coat it in ice. It's not gonna make it like stop or anything. It'll make it faster maybe. It's like, okay, can I like can I thunder wave it with like a thunder wave as it gets closer for thunder damage? And he's like, I mean, the boulder can't really make a con save, really. It's a boulder. Like it, it's like, well, what can I do then? What do you want me to do?
What's funny is like if you're any of those things except for the thunder wave, I would have said no to. But the thunder wave, I would say yes. Thunder wave, instinctively, it's you look at other thunder spells, they do more damage against things like rock and crystal.
Well, it's more like glass, crystal, things that
not
like
even
have,
rock.
I mean, it does say specifically inorganic matter. To be fair, that is true. It does say it does damage to like inorganic matter.
Is it going to destroy the boulder? No, but it might push the boulder back and fuck up the trap. If you time it correctly. And I think me and you, I think, have a little bit of a different outlook on what we would allow people to do. I'm definitely more along the lines of, if I can see it making sense, then I'll let it happen. But like if someone's oh, I want to use Ray of Frost to freeze this river. No, it's a cantrip. It's not what it does. Sorry. If there was a puddle, sure. If you throw a bottle of water onto the ground and cast a Ray of Frost into it, I'll let you make it slick. That's fine. But you're not freezing a pond. You're not freezing a river because it's a cantrip. It's not supposed to do that. That's the whole point. Like, there's a reason why.
It would depend then, right? Because you say it depends on what makes sense. But that's the slippery slope there, though, Sammy, isn't it? Is that logic and sense is highly subjective to a person.
Yeah, no, you're right.
And so, like, for instance, it's like, here's the thing. If we, like, look up literally what this spell Ray of Frost kind of does, it's like, okay, there's again, to be fair, I agree as a cantrip. It's like you want to manage the exact power and effects that a cantrip can do because you can do them kind of as much as you want.
Yeah, cantrips aren't supposed to be.
But it's like, okay, you fire a frigid beam of blue-white light toward a creature within range. It makes a ranged spell attack against the target. Takes 1d8 cold, and its speed is reduced by 10 to the start of your next turn.
That's all.
So, I mean, like, yeah, to be fair, it's like, it does specifically say a frigid beam of energy. So it's like, all right, it is like obviously like a cold thing. It does affect things, targets that it hits with frost. So for instance, because it literally does say it slows the target's movement down, potentially it could slow the boulder then maybe. If the boulder is moving and you fire at the beam with it, like with even just with the wording that it says there.
Yeah, so 10 feet. It goes 10 feet slower.
If you keep firing at it, would it then continuously like slow the boulder down to the point where it's like,
no, it wouldn't. Because, well, here's my argument. And I think this is what I'm going to say this about this whole scenario. I think with stuff like this, we're all going to have different opinions. If you have, I would say hold yourself to your logic, because if you're not consistent, then that's going to mess things up even more. Obviously, you can see right here, me and Adam have a different opinion on this specific thing, right? But it doesn't mean either of us is wrong. But it means if we flip-flop on it, it makes things harder to work through. So
that is the thing. Consistency is important.
Here's what I would say. You can fire off a cantrip every 6 seconds, every round of combat. There is probably something in the trap that says how far the boulder moves per round.
Per round.
Which means you wouldn't be able to stop the boulder, but you could reduce it by 10 feet every round if you continue to cast it every round. And the moment you start attacking things, if it's going to be one of those things that you're like, well, I want to keep hitting it, well, I'd be like, all right, we're going to go into a loose initiative then, where all of you get to do something and then the boulder gets to move. Because for me, this spell is not supposed to freeze a body of water. It's not what it was meant to do. It does cold damage, yes. It can reduce the movement of something, yes. You would assume it's because either the creature is so cold, it's just moving slower, or literal physical ice crystals keep it from moving faster.
Form on it, potentially.
But either way, if it's just because it makes it more cold, that doesn't do anything to a boulder. So we're going to take that off the table, and we're going to say that it's ice crystals. Okay.
Sure.
Still, at most, it's a boulder, or it's a big rolling orb of stone. I'll give you the 10 feet. I'll give you the 10 feet. I feel like that's fair. You know, I think Ray of Frost is one of those spells. Like, if someone came to me and said, I want to freeze a puddle of water underneath someone with Ray of Frost. Well, you're not hitting the person, so you're foregoing damage. It's a cool idea that requires 2 actions of setup because someone else has to put the water there. That works for me. I think that's great. If it's a large body of water, it's not going to do anything.
You're not going to freeze an entire body of water, obviously.
And like, even with one cast of Ray of Frost, you might create an icy surface. It's not large enough to hold weight of anything.
No, it's not going to be. You're not going to be able to walk across it with Ray of Frost.
It's like when you put an ice cube tray in the fridge for like 20 minutes and everything has a very thin layer of ice on the outside. But the moment you touch it, it breaks in.
Yeah.
It's like that. But
it would be like that. It would be hollow.
If someone said, hey, I'm at the bar and this beer is kind of warm, can I use Ray of Frost to cool it down? Of course. Are you kidding me? That's a wonderful use of this spell that isn't an attack. Like, you could say, hey, I don't want to do damage. I just want to use the cold part.
Yeah.
And make
I just want to literally lower the temperature right here in this
of this item. That's great. I love that. I think that's cool.
Me
Does
too.
the spell say you can do that? No, but to me, logically, while you might not be able to freeze a boulder with a cantrip, you can definitely make your drink cold with a cantrip. And so I think that was, those are things like...
Well, see, that in there, though, like that, one could make the argument that it's like, hey, that right there is the flip-flopping of logic, where it's like, if you can cool down and chill this material here, the liquid in this whatever, then you should also technically maybe be able to cool down or chill that material of, like, say, the boulder, right? Because at that point, it would start to get colder. However, it still
doesn't do anything to speed at all. So
I mean, it can, in the sense of, like, once again, if it starts to build up, let's say again, icicles and shit on it, and in this particular scenario, the boulder is in a space where it is like there is no little cracks or things really to get around it. Meaning, if it starts to build up frost and ice, it'll start to expand, at least with the ice, that'll start catching on the sides or the fullness of the room, which could, again, just, what's the word I'm looking, physically speaking, start to slow the boulder's trajectory and movement going down, because its literal size has expanded to the point where it is no longer able to smoothly roll through this dimension of the room.
I think,
again, it's like, that's my point being. It's like how logic can take us so far depending on how deep and in depth you really want to get into it. And that's obviously the point of the game, right? At that point, it becomes the literal decision of the GM about, do you want to go down this path with your players to, like, again, assist them in this idea that they're wanting? Or do you want to be like, well, that's not technically how the spell works. Well, it's not how it says. And so,
here's the way you could take it. There's 2 ways you could take this. I look at it in terms of scale.
I
How
agree.
much area is
How much power does this
a
cantrip
cantrip,
have?
first level spell, second level spell, third?
I agree.
What is the scale? Then the second thing I say is, technically, if we want to get technical, none of that works because Ray of Frost only targets a creature.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. But
So
technically speaking, it's like
only a creature. You have to target a creature. So
you have to
unfortunately,
target a creature. So it's like,
I
that's
think
the
it's
thing.
the same thing with Firebolt. So no, you can't set that house on fire with Firebolt on purpose because you have to target a creature. You could somehow, but like that's where it ends, because then someone's like, well, what if I just want to aim poorly? What if I cover my eyes and shoot at it? Well, now it's a disadvantage because if they miss, it's going to hit the house.
No, what I was going to say, it's like that. I mean, and that's where the logic has to apply it, where it's like you can't just simply go off of what the spell might say due to the logic of physics and how it interacts. Because again, you say like, oh, I fire this firebolt. Then if it only is supposed to target and affect the creature, then why isn't it a saving throw? If I'm making an attack roll, it means it's a projectile that has to come from me and affect that creature or something else. If I miss the attack, then that means it goes somewhere else. And it is still there. It's not going to not burn something because it wasn't the designated target.
Like,
so, although no, to be fair, I guess Firebolt does specifically say you can hurl a modifier at a creature or object within range.
Firebolt's different. So Ray of Frost says just creature.
Technically,
with Ray of Frost, you can find a mimic in a room full of chests because everything else will just take damage or won't take damage because you're not actually attacking it. But the moment you hit the right thing, that's a mimic. Now, in my logistical brain, that's dumb.
That's dumb. That's just dumb. Doesn't make sense. That's not logical.
You know, as much as you're playing devil's advocate on how much Ray of Frost can do, I think at least for me, I think it's a scaling issue.
And it's also again, it's not even just necessarily like, it also has to do with the situation that you're currently in, right? Like, I agree 100%. You can't use Ray of Frost to create a frost bridge to walk across a vast body of water. You know, if anything, it's like, okay, let's say, for instance, Ray of Frost, it hits a creature medium size. The max medium size would be like, what, 8 feet, I would assume? Maybe 9 feet tall, maybe. And so let's say, okay, it can affect a creature approximately 9 feet tall. And we can maybe even say it could then potentially affect an area comprising of, let's just say, a 5 foot square, basically, like whatever, right? Yeah. Or maybe even a bit more, maybe even, you know, either way, if it can affect a creature that size, or hell, even technically, if you fire it at any creature of size, it would technically still make that creature, because there's no size restriction in the spell. So any creature you hit with it, their movement speed is just reduced by 10.
Yeah.
Meaning that the spell, technically speaking, even just words as written, it corresponds not necessarily to the space or whatever that hits, but to the target that is hit. Meaning that it can technically affect a space however big you want, you know. So I guess if it hits the lake, rules as written is, it's like, oh yeah, it could technically, I guess, affect the entirety of the lake. But that again,
it doesn't say anything about freezing anything.
It doesn't freeze anything. It doesn't it reduces movement speed. And then one would say like, well, then how does it reduce movement speed? And it's like, okay,
magic.
Probably from, yes, you're hitting something with a frigid beam of energy. It makes them cold. It probably like shuts down their motor skills and interferes with, you know, stuff like that. Doesn't necessarily make ice. It doesn't necessarily, you know, conjure whatever, but it could. You could also say like, okay, yeah, you know what? It makes icicles around their body that, like, you know, freeze and temporarily kind of restrict their movement, maybe.
Yeah.
That now comes down to the flavor of it. And so, like, as we were saying before, the real crux of this whole topic is, like, you know, in terms of it being low magic, high magic, is again, options, right? And ironically, the only real restriction of options is the GM's imagination and willingness to work with a player's imagination, right? Because you could make a cantrip, you know, more versatile and capable and effective or powerful, depending on how the GM chooses to allow the interpretation of what the spell describes that it does. Like, for instance, and in a game I'm currently playing, which I really love, and it's been an amazing time so far. I'm playing a wizard, and I like to utilize the spells, Mold Earth and Shape Water, right? Now, for the spell Shape Water, the specific text would be, it is a cantrip. You can choose an area of water that you can see within range and that fits within a 5-foot cube. You manipulate it in one of the following ways. You instantaneously move or otherwise change the flow of the water as you direct up to 5 feet in any direction. This movement doesn't have enough force to cause damage. You cause the water to form into simple shapes and animate at your direction. This change lasts for 1 hour. You change the water's color or opacity. The water must be changed in the same way throughout, and this change lasts for 1 hour. You can instantly freeze the water, provided that there are no creatures in it, and the water unfreezes in 1 hour. If you cast the spell multiple times, you can have no more than 2 of its non-instantaneous effects active at a time, and you can dismiss such an effect as an action. So with that, for instance, because of the fact that this spell deliberately states it affects a 5-foot cube area, right? It can basically choose an area of water or liquid that you can see within range that fits within a 5-foot cube, and you can affect it in one of those following ways. Technically more than one, honestly, if you master cast it. So it's like, I have used this spell usually as a means of, like, my character is in like a bar or a tavern, right? I've used this spell to be like, I'm going to affect, all of the liquor within this 5-foot cube space, and I'm going to start making, like, cocktails and mixtures and stuff with the liquid here, and then, like, put it inside. So I effectively use it almost like, a highly, and forgive the pun, watered down version of water bending from Avatar: The Last Airbender, right? Where just like you can literally just manipulate liquid and water in the area within a 5-foot cube, which is a pretty decent size space, and manipulate it in the ways that you want to manipulate it in.
And the funny thing about that is some people would be like, oh, well, you can only have 2 effects at once. Well,
yeah,
sorry, but I can technically pull all of the liquid out of all these bottles in this 5-foot thing and put them together. Now, even if you want to make the argument that each bottle is its own action, cocktails take time to make. So I could just technically, I'm just recasting the spell to do things.
I could recast, and I can cast it an infinite amount of times. There is no limit to how much I can cast it. I could just keep going.
That's the point. That's the point of things like cantrips.
Exactly.
That's why they work the way they work.
And so here's the thing. Here's then the question you would ask too to that GM about basically being like, well, you have to, like, it's like, okay, so let me ask you a question. Is it going to be more fun and more interesting if I'm just able to just instantaneously affect all liquid? Because that all this is what the spell says. I can affect all water or liquid within a 5-foot cube within range that I can see. So I could technically, as long as within that 5, if I put all the bottles there, I can affect all of that liquid and water in that area. So it's like, I can do that. Now I can also, I would have to recast the spell again to then, freeze it or whatever, or do another effect on it. However, one could also make the, like, proposition that it's like, okay, it's still currently in the air, so I can still technically affect it in this way. I set it here, and then I recast it to do another thing that I need to do in order to continue on with this display. Now, is it going to make more sense in this role play moment? It doesn't have any real effect in terms of, like, damage or combat. Is it really going to be that big of a mind-blowing, disgrace of whatever that you just let me do this stuff in this seemingly fluid, interesting, performative way? Is that really going to break the game?
Even if you want to get particular on rules, it only takes somatic components. So part of you manipulating this water could be you weaving in what the movements you do to cast the spell all together. And if you're good enough at it, you've done it for a long enough time, it's going to look performative anyway. So even for the sake of arguing against it, you're still arguing for it. What you said is completely within the bounds of the spell. It is maybe a little bit, some people would argue, like, maybe it's a little bit, like, intricate, but realistically, it doesn't say anything about intricacy.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't.
Well, I can't fucking say the word. Thank you.
Intricacy. You said it right. That is essentially. But again, there are plenty of people who would try to make the argument that it's like, well, you have to then recast the spell every 6 seconds or whatever to continue to do it, and you couldn't still have it in the air. You couldn't do, like, crazy displays of like, you know, the water forming shapes or whatever, while also still being able to move, you know, in this way all at the same time. And it's like, well, there's not necessarily anything explicitly saying that you can't, because there's also like, it says duration is instantaneous, right? It's like you instantaneously move the water and have it flow in this kind of way, right? And so it's like, if you have it doing that, there's nothing necessarily that says that it, like, you know, stops per se at that moment.
Even then, you don't even have to use that. You cause the water. You can use the first part to move everything up.
Yep.
Second part is to form it into simple shapes
Into
and
a
animate
shape
at your direction.
And animate at your direction. Yep.
That lasts for an hour.
That lasts for an hour.
You could cast it once.
Pull everything you need out of each bottle in front of you.
Yep.
And then swirl it around for an hour.
It around for an hour, and then but then also recast it with the instantaneous, and then still change the flow and direction to also.
You don't even have to.
You don't have to, but you can. That makes it even more of a thing where you can control it in that way.
But even if you actually read it, nothing you did is outside of the rules of as written.
But people could still make the argument of like, well, that's not how the spell was intended to be used. And it's like, well, technically you're probably right. Technically, it's like that's maybe not really the intention of it, to use it kind of like how water bending would work in Avatar or whatever. We can move over to the next one specifically as well, which is mold earth. You know, it functions in a very similar way. It's a little bit more restrictive in its verbiage, to be fair, but it also gives the same kind of vibe of like, it's a cantrip. You're not necessarily doing it outside the purview of what it's meant to be used for. There's no reason to be a stickler about it, really. Like, you choose a portion of dirt or stone that you can see within range that fits within a 5-foot cube. You manipulate it in one of the following ways. If you target an area of loose earth, you can instantaneously excavate it, move it along the ground, and deposit it up to 5 feet away. This movement doesn't have enough force to cause damage. You can also cause shapes, colors, or both to appear on the dirt or stone, spelling out words, creating images, or shaping patterns. The change lasts for 1 hour. If the dirt or stone you target is on the ground, you can cause it to become difficult terrain. Alternatively, you can cause the ground to become normal terrain if it is already difficult terrain. This change lasts for 1 hour. If you cast the spell multiple times, you can have no more than 2 of its instantaneous effects active at a time, and you can dismiss it as an action. So it's like, here's the thing. Obviously, with the specific verbiage that is being used for this description, the first one is a little less, I guess, ironically, again, pardon the pun, fluid than shape water would be. In terms of like, it does specifically state, you target an area of loose earth and can instantaneously excavate it, move it along the ground, and deposit it up to 5 feet away. Now, obviously, the opportune word there would be loose earth, right? What is considered truly loose earth, right? Let's say you have a 5-foot cube of stone inside, like, you know, a hole of dirt, or even that is like, you know, it's a 5-foot cube of stone that is placed in a 5-foot hole surrounded by other stone. Now, the question would be, would that 5-foot cube of stone still technically be considered loose earth? It's like,
no, it's loose stone.
But stone is technically earth, one could say. Like, one
depends.
could make the argument stone is earth. It's more
Is it just a big piece of stone?
Refined earth, but it is earth. Because, for instance, earthbenders could move stone in Avatar: The Last Airbender.
But that's not the same thing. So
how do you define earth?
Exactly. Well, okay, if it's a big rock, that's not earth. That's rock. They're intrinsically different things, to me at least. If I was going to explain this to someone, now the loose earth part to me is a bad writing choice.
I agree
for this spell,
but
I think it should be, hey, is there dirt on the ground? I can move it. I can dig a hole 5 feet by 5 feet.
That's the thing. Is earth just?
You wouldn't be able to move solid rock. No, solid rock. No, gravel, sand, even like, you know, like what they make alleys out of. Where it's like the rocks granite, like that. There's like rocks that big.
Cobblestone.
No, not cobblestone. No. Like alleys behind your house today.
Oh,
like they're like rocks about that size, right?
Yeah,
but they're loose. They're all together, but it's mostly rocks. You could move that with this spell. Now, if there is like, if you are on a piece of, but if you're on like a piece of flagstone, you can't move 5-foot cube of flagstone.
Is rock like, because that's again like this is the problem with like these types of like spells or verbiage, again, it's all about the interpretation of the GM, right? And in terms of like, is rock considered earth? Like, because again, that is kind of the problem, right? This spell becomes almost null and void in a lot of ways, where it's just like, oh, only dirt is considered earth.
Well, I just want to point out something.
Okay.
It says it in the spell. You can choose a portion of dirt or stone. So wait. The first one is just loose earth. It's not talking about stone. The second two are stone. It says dirt or stone.
It does say
so.
Dirt
The first one
stone.
I think is just dirt. If we're going by as written, it's just earth.
I
would let you use.
Wait though. But hang on. It specifically says earth, however, whereas the other two, it does specifically say
dirt
you
or
choose
stone.
a dirt or stone, meaning earth could probably encompass both those things. To be fair, rocks form from the Earth's outer solid layer, the crust, and most of its interior, except for the liquid outer core, whatever. So, judging by this, rocks could also technically count as Earth.
Fine. So, for the sake of your argument, you're going into science about the planet, which might not even work the same in D&D. Just putting that out there.
I mean, we're specifically, but in that same vein, then we could specifically say that, okay, what's to say that then stone and earth or stone and dirt or rock is not considered also earth in that capacity?
No, so that's fine. But this cantrip makes sense if it's loose. So if it's a solid rock, if it's a boulder, you cannot create a 5-foot cube and pull it out. That's not how that works.
No. What I'm saying is if you can fit a 5-foot cube, if the boulder literally is able to fit inside the 5-foot cube,
that's fine.
Then you can move that
because it's loose. It's not connected to anything.
Exactly.
That's why it says loose. But what I'm saying is,
so that was why I presented that earlier example of like, if you have a 5-foot dimensional piece of stone, you put it in a 5-foot hole surrounded by other stone. Would you technically be able to move that 5-foot piece of stone again out of that hole again?
Just the loose piece.
Okay. Now here's the question: if you break the stone up, does it then become loose enough for you to then move?
If it's if you take a big thing and break it into pieces, this spell would allow you to move it because it is not attached to anything else. This spell is not going to be strong enough to rip rock apart.
No, you can't, like, for instance, like tear a wall down with this spell. Like, that's not how it's.
I would argue,
works. But
I would argue pieces of rock, gravel, sand, even like small rocks like that size in a big pile.
Would you agree that anything that you can encompass within that 5-foot square, you can manipulate as long as it is loose enough to basically, pull and manipulate?
I think that's fine.
Or even if it's not even loose, even if you can just fit it in there, even if it literally encompasses the full dimensions of that space, you can move it within that dimension of space. Okay,
as long as it's not attached to anything.
That being the case,
that's my only thing.
Yeah, if you would like, for instance, let's say you hammer a wall enough to crack it and start to kind of bust it up, would you then be able to technically maneuver those cracks and stuff through it? Because technically, it's not connected anymore. It's been cracked apart.
So here's my problem. Cracking something doesn't mean it's not connected because it's a wall. It's a large space. So unless you take a 5-foot hole and you chisel around this 5-foot area, then you could move that, but that's not how you're breaking anything.
Well, but again, specifically, you just said if it's not directly connected. So here's the thing: does connected mean that it's touching, or does it have to specifically be a seamless connection with something?
Connection isn't seamless. So for example, brick. You could not pull someone's bricks out of their wall with this spell. I don't think that's fair because they're connected. They're built in such a way that everything uses gravity to sit on top of each other.
They're stuck, and it is like, because here's the question though. Here's the question: if water could leak through a particular thing,
sure,
would you then technically be able to say it's not truly connected if water can break through?
Because rock can be porous, Adam. It can be porous.
Yeah. I agree.
So I don't think that constitutes being loose earth.
Let's say, for instance, I'm not even talking about specifically like water being able to leak through porous rock. I'm even talking about the specific adhesive material that is used to connect these separate bricks together. And
so I'm going to give you an example. If you are connecting two bricks together with mortar, the way we do now, to separate the bricks once the mortar has dried, you need a fucking sledgehammer.
Oh yeah.
You know why? Because the mortar adheres into the porous part of the brick. It is now one thing. You can't break it. You need a fucking sledgehammer.
Oh yeah, I agree.
So I think that this is a cantrip, not a sledgehammer. I don't think.
Well,
look,
I'm not
everything
saying it's a
else.
sledgehammer.
Everything
I'm
else
saying
is fine.
If you took a hammer to something, that's why I introduced the earlier example. If you took a hammer to a wall, you slammed it, smashed it, maybe a couple of times, whatever. It fractures and cracks the wall multiple times. Could you not then pull at least parts of that wall out and start to further weaken the foundation? And there might not be. Not the entire wall might be fully cracked all the way through.
No, I would say this spell is not to pull things out of the wall. It's to move things that have fallen off the wall. That's my final. That's how I feel about it. I don't think I like if you did if I was running a game and you wanted to do that, I'd tell you no.
Oh, look, I'm just saying then, but that right there people could make the argument that is in contradictory to your earlier agreement that I can move a 5-foot like square piece of stone out of a hole. And then move it, deposit it 5 feet away.
If it's completely disconnected from the stone around it.
Sure. But my point being is that same scenario, technically speaking, when you crack a wall, that shit now that's been cracked there, if you have pieces that are fully cracked out,
sure, if it's cracked all the way out, but that's just going to fall off the wall. I think you're using
it'll still be held in place by pressure, Sam.
You're using this wall scenario in a way that walls don't work.
I am, because there's pressure still happening.
No, but that's not
just because something's been cracked fully all around where technically it's been separated due to the fact that there's still pressure and weight happening on top of it. It's not necessarily just going to automatically fall out necessarily. Okay.
Well, so you'd only be able to pull small things that are completely disconnected from everything else in a 5-foot cube. If you crack a wall, how much of that wall is going to be in 5-foot cube scenarios? Not much of it.
I mean, no, it's not really going to do anything. 5-foot cube. You could literally move anything within that 5-foot cube that isn't completely connected out. So that as long as it's the case,
as long as it's only in that 5-foot cube.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
But however, that being the case, if you start to move that stuff, whatever is in there, you don't even necessarily know, but you can affect a 5-foot cube, which isn't a small amount. You can pull literally everything in there. That could also potentially start to crack and break more due to, again, the lack of pressure and foundation, creating more cracks, creating more ripples.
But it's not going to do what you want it to do.
I mean, it kind of is if you're agreeing with the fact that it can affect it in that way. Like, that's my point being with this spell.
And I don't think walls are considered loose earth then.
My point is you can make them loose earth, technically speaking.
Well, no, that's a building material. That's not considered loose earth anymore.
Just what is the material comprised of, Sam? Earth.
Yeah, it's fine, but I think the argument there is that it's not. Look, the reality is everything except that one thing I'm fine with.
My point, and again, my point being is fine, but one could place the proposition that is a contradiction then, because again, it's comprised of earth. It is just because it's a wall of a castle, it's comprised of stone and earth at this point.
Sure.
So you crack it enough, you could realistically begin to pull shit out of there. And at that point, I also would submit, like, if you're able to technically pull some of the wall out, it's like, you know what? Fuck it. Yes, you can start just pulling pieces of the wall out until eventually you're able to break the wall down with the help. Again, it's not even like you can just do it from a solid thing. I'm saying you work in tandem or by yourself. Okay. You have a hammer, you crack shit, you pull some shit out. Okay, it's probably going to have an effect.
For the sake of your argument, if you're doing this to a large building, it's not going to immediately collapse because you pull 5-foot cubes out of the side of it.
We're not talking about collapsing a building. We're talking about getting through the wall.
So the reality is that one, this is a loud process. It's not a fast process. So yeah, sure, you could try. I depending on how effective it's going to be is how big the walls are. If the walls are thicker than 5 feet, it's going to take a while.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So like realistically,
but you can still affect it.
You can try. Yes,
you can absolutely still affect it. You can literally, again, it'll take a while and some vinegar, but you could effectively tunnel your way through a wall.
And again, like if someone tells me I'm going to cast it on this solid stone rock, no, No, you can't. Figure out a way to make it loose earth then.
You cannot affect it unless it is within that 5-foot cube. We already established that.
Yeah.
We already agreed upon that it obviously has to be effective within the 5-foot cube. But if it's solid and technically though not attached to anything else,
that's fine.
In that 5-foot cube, you can move it.
Yeah, if you have a sphere of rock that is within a 5-foot cube, yeah, you can move it around. Why the fuck not?
Sure. There you go. All right.
You know, this is a good lesson to learn. We'll flip this in a positive way. If you're gonna hold yourself to something, learn how to deal with people trying to argue with you about your rulings. But then remember, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what they say because it's your game. So as long as you stick to your guns and you're respectful,
it's important to be able to be respectful. Stick to it. It's important to be able though to take, you know, differing thoughts and opinions and outlooks. You know, hear people. And here's the thing though, like it's good to stick to your guns at times. But it's also equally as important to be able to acknowledge if you're wrong or maybe if you made a bad call. That is also important. If you made a bad call and people are like, you know what, we didn't really like that or like that, whatever. And you're like, okay, you know what? If I made a mistake, I apologize.
And it's okay to be wrong.
It's okay to be wrong.
And hell, me and you just argued about mold earth for 15 minutes. And the reality is neither of us were disrespectful the whole time we were talking about it.
Not at all.
But that's what you take from this is that you don't scream at somebody and tell them they're an idiot. You talk about why you disagree. And if and here's the thing, as a player, and you're playing in the middle of a session and there's a call you don't like, and you go and argue it, and the DM shuts it down. But like isn't mean, but is like, hey, sorry, that's not gonna happen.
I'm choosing to say this doesn't work here.
You don't argue then.
Yeah, at that point,
you argue after the session.
At that point,
you talk after the session. And you could be like, hey, I don't like this call, but like, can we talk about why I don't like it? And maybe it'll change.
If it really matters to you that much, like if it really was like a thing where you're like, you know what? I really feel like I should be able to kind of do this thing, or I disagree with this because I would like to utilize this in this way because it's cool, whatever. Then as Sam just said, absolutely, you talk with them out of the game. When the game is over, you have a personal conversation, interaction with them, and you convey to them why, you know, your stance, your opinion, and why you feel like you should be able to do this. And the GM will respond back and either, you know, will choose to work with you to like maybe be like, okay, you know what, next time this comes up, we can reopen it and see if it makes more sense. Like you can do some research to provide more evidence to support your stance, and the GM can as well. At the end of the day, though, it is the GM's call on whether or not they want to allow that in their game.
Yeah.
And you either have to accept that or, you know, not, I guess.
I think that there's also, you know, there's some GMs who will be like, the first time you argue something at a table, they'll be ready to hash it out and retcon. The reason I say don't, and I'm assuming it's the same for Adam, the reason I say don't argue too much in a session is because that completely derails anything you're doing. And it's not a good feeling. One, to be someone watching two people argue in a D&D session where you're supposed to be having fun. Yeah. Two, being the DM who's having someone tell him he's bad at DMing in front of the other people he's DMing to. Yeah. Because you might not mean it in a way. I was gonna say, and you might not even actually say that. But like, hey, I mean, I don't know about you, Adam, but I've DM'd where people call out something that they think is wrong. It doesn't make you feel good, even if they're wrong. Tell me that something works a different way. I've looked, saw that they were wrong, told them, no, sorry, that's not how that works. Read the spell again. But I still feel icky. Oh, because someone looked at me and went, no. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not how this is supposed to go.
It never feels great when a person is just objectively saying that you did something wrong, right? Even the word wrong, when you say it, elicits almost a visceral reaction of some sort in a negative manner. Because it hurts in some way where you're just like, I'm wrong. Like it doesn't feel good. And like, so it's never great to and the issue being too is obviously when a player has like a feeling or an idea about how they want to use a spell, especially if they've like looked it over and like, oh, this could be so cool. And then the GM shuts it down. One could say that it is in essence a sense of them being like, no, you were wrong. You can't do that. And that's also maybe another reason why a person might feel more inclined to argue. Now, I also do want to say, while we're on the subject, there are some things that maybe you do need to like argue and fight about, such as if a GM does make a straight up horrible call, like a terrible, horrible call where they're just like, yeah, like I think I told you all about this a little bit about my did the cringe campaign that I was a part of, where literally in that campaign, the GM would literally just try to be like, yeah, you guys just all take 110 points of damage from this thing. And it's like, whoa, wait, what? No, that's not how that works. You can't just say we take damage without any kind of attempt at a save or a reaction, anything. Like that is a crappy call. And that is some shit that you absolutely, in my opinion, should fight against and be like, no, that because the moment when you don't fight against something like that, it becomes basically the expectation, right? It becomes the staple of like, oh, that's okay. You didn't bring any attention to that. And that's something you should bring attention to immediately. Because it's like,
and that whole arguing that call, it's one of two things. At best case, the person just forgot to have you make the save. People forget things all the time.
Yeah.
At worst,
and that's why you specifically like, oh, what can I make a save or anything? Like if you have
Remind
a problem, you can ask a question, right? You don't have to overtly just be like, what the hell? That was shit. No, I'm not like, you respond, it's like, oh, can I make a save or a check, or like, do I have a reaction? Can I do something to like, offset that? And at the moment they say like, no, you can't do anything. At that point, then it's like, but that's not how that's supposed to work though. Like the core mechanics of the game specifically are all about any effect that takes place against you that isn't like an attack roll. You get to make a save for that, like in some way, shape, or form. Like you can't just say, oh, I take this damage for no reason other than I just take it. Like, and once again, always with, you should until proven otherwise, provide as much respect and reason and consideration as you can to the person, because again, maybe they're misinterpreting something that they read or that they saw or that they thought, whatever, and it might not be an intentional thing that they're trying to do. Obviously, the moment they show that it is intentional, at that point all bets are off and you can just say screw that motherfucker and
leave.
Go,
just go somewhere else,
go off, or freaking leave, like, or both.
But that's kind of the point here is you have to frame it in such a way where not every mistake a player or a GM makes is malicious. And I'd say more often than not, in my experience, they haven't been. I think more often it's ignorance than maliciousness.
And not even like, again, like the bad kind of ignorance where they're not even trying to. It's more so maybe just misinformation or misremembering. It's like
they've never had anyone tell them otherwise.
Yeah, they just assume that this was how it worked. Again, I been playing with another group as well with a GM who he has said like straight off the top that he was a new GM and he was bound to make mistakes. And that like he has an overpowered feature in his game where like if you're dual wielding, like you get to just attack, like each separate attack action, you can attack with both weapons with just one attack action. So like each attack you make is basically like with both weapons. So you effectively can like get 4 attacks if you have like multi-attack, right? You have multi-attack, you get the capstone fighter ability at 5th level if you have 2 weapons in each hand. And it's like that's a bit busted, that's a bit overpowered. And he was just like, oh, like when that first happened, I was like, oh, don't you only make like 1 attack or then 1 other attack with each weapon? And he's like, oh, well, I actually specifically told him that this is how it does it. I assume I probably just misinterpreted the rules for multi-attack and dual wielding from like an earlier campaign, and that's kind of just how we did it. And that's why dual wielding is so busted in my campaign. And I was like, oh, well, all right, hey, if people are having fun with that and if it's not too busted or whatever, then it's like, all right, that's fine. Because also, to be fair, like in this campaign, like he's specifically designing it where like all of us are super kind of OP and busted in a lot of ways. And so it's like in that particular thing, it's like, I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I was just curious. I was like, oh, I didn't know if the player had mistyped the amount of attacks. And so I just kind of pointed out a thing where I was like, oh, is that how? And he's like, yeah, oh yeah, that's kind of just how we do that thing. I'm like, oh, okay. And that's fine. Like people are okay with it. That's fine. Like I'm not like, we don't have to necessarily follow the rules entirely as written. If this is your homebrew campaign, if you guys are comfortable, if you have fun with that, then that's fine with me.
Yeah, I mean, like me personally, the moment someone comes up with some shit like that, I'd be gone. I can't do it. I don't care what argument or I'm not gonna be mean about it. I'm like, oh, I'm glad you guys are having fun with that. I'm gonna find some other thing to do. Sorry. That's just not me. I don't like it. I don't know. To me, it's like, let's play a game where we completely ignore all of the rules and not read, evidently. Which, look, I know I'm being a little bit of a shitter, but
a little bit.
Most of the baseline rules in this game are not difficult to understand. It gets into some weird fuckery with wording, a couple abilities.
To be fair, offhanded attacks are kind of like, they're not the best. They are not like.
I never had an issue with them.
Well, because for instance, it's like, again, if you do have multi-attack, like I said, you and I also differ with the fact it's like, I believe you have multi-attack, you can attack with either sword. It's not necessarily always
that's fine.
Just your main weapon.
You got me to admit it.
Yeah, you have two.
You
attacks.
got me to admit it.
There we go. All right, perfect.
You did.
Because it's, because it is like, oh, you have your offhanded weapon. The technical rules are once you take the attack action, you can attack with your offhand weapon as a bonus action.
Yeah.
Right. And then you don't get like your modifier to the damage.
The way I like looking at it is, I think you should still have what is your offhand weapon. But my thing is like,
what if you're ambidextrous?
Sure. Well, if you take the dual wielder feat, fine. But if you're a normal person, if you're a normal person who happens to be carrying a short sword and a dagger, and you attack twice with your short sword, and your offhand attack is your extra stab, I don't think there's a problem with that. I think if you're high level, you can argue like, we've been doing this long enough. Like, I can kind of do whatever I want, and I think that's okay. But at level 2. I feel like
I might be more like I said, like I might be more willing to be like, well, I feel like again, once you get multi-attack, I feel like at that point you can just attack with whatever weapon in your hand, as like you can attack with the one twice, or you can attack with both of them once, or whatever. Like, because you have multi-attack at that point. If it's the one attack, I would agree. I would say you can only attack once with the one, and then whatever is the offhanded attack, whichever one you didn't, and you're using a bonus action for, then that is the one. You don't get your modifier to the damage for that one.
Once you have the fighting style.
Yeah, but once you get freaking multi-attack at that point, I'm like, yeah, you can attack with both. That's fine. Because you can attack twice. Why, especially if you're trying to do this, you shouldn't have to take a feat unless you get that feat for free in order to make dual wielding a viable freaking build. Like that just doesn't make sense to me. Like, that's like, you shouldn't necessarily have to sacrifice an attribute thing.
You don't need the dual wielder feat to make dual wielding work. You need the dual wielding fighting style.
Well, I mean, dual wielding fighting style. Like, you shouldn't have to necessarily have that just to make dual wielding a thing either. Like even the dual wielding fighting style also doesn't even make it like great either.
No, it makes it the same as your normal. You get your modifier just like
bonus,
always.
If you use a bonus action, but again, there's no reason why you can't attack with either one with your multi-attack.
I see what you're saying. But technically the whole point of dual wielding is so you can attack
I know,
more.
So you can attack more. So I agree. I feel like maybe then, like, would you then be able to technically use your bonus action as another attack, like to get 3 attacks potentially? No. Like,
no, it's not how it's designed. That'll fuck up your action economy completely.
Well,
it's not. I mean, it will.
Well, but here's the thing, though. Technically speaking, you could get 3 attacks because you get multi-attack if you say, oh, I attack twice with my main weapon, and then I bonus action attack with my offhanded weapon. You'd still get 3 attacks.
Yeah. So you get 3 attacks or 3 attacks.
Yeah. So basically, it would just be the same thing, being like, okay, I attack my first weapon with this. I attack my second weapon with my main 2 melee attacks. And you can just basically be like, okay, my offhanded weapon is now technically the one that I am using for my bonus action. And you just wouldn't get the modifier for that. Like, that would basically just be what that is to me. Like,
yeah, I mean, in my games I have a dual wielding character, my bonus action attack is always a different weapon than my normal attacks, because it's just how I designed the character.
I mean, that's fine. Like I said, if you want to do it that way, if you're just like wham, wham, and then wham, it's like, okay, sure. But I don't see any logical, reasonable reason why you can't go wham, wham, wham. And it's just like, the first 2 attacks, you have your full strength behind them. And then the third one is, you don't get the modifier with it.
I think realistically, as long as your second weapon is used once within action and bonus action, it doesn't really matter which one you use. So that's a fine rule.
I mean, that's how I feel. Again,
now getting double the attacks because you're dual wielding, that's garbage.
No, I mean, It's a lot.
bad. It's a bad rule
it's
because
not necessarily bad, Sam.
it is
It's
because sword and board and two-handed now become obsolete to carrying two swords.
I agree. It gives a very and he himself acknowledges it gives a very clear advantage for anyone who is dual wielding,
Right.
and an unfair one at
Look,
that. It is
Duke
true.
Duke can have fun with his game. All I'm saying is I won't play in a game like that.
That's fine. I'm just
That's
saying
all.
again. Well, you were saying it's specifically garbage, and I'm saying it's not objectively garbage because
It's
you could
fine.
also technically, do other things with other stuff too. But I agree.
Well, you'd have to.
I agree. It's not my favorite thing, but either way, it's like, hey, you're having fun. Fair enough. Like,
Sorry.
and
Let me
and,
reframe. I don't mean it's garbage. I do not understand why you'd want that. I don't get it. I don't understand it whatsoever.
Because it's cool. Because it's cool.
The
Because
game
you can
itself
literally
is
just
cool.
like, I agree.
Cool weapons are cool.
But
Just
some
play the game.
people like to just do more shit too. Like, people like to flesh
Fine.
their imagination and become,
If you're gonna do that, then you get double attacks as a dual wield, but my two-handed weapon deals double damage.
Yeah, I'm down for that. That sounds fair
If
to
I
me.
use a shield, I get double the AC from it.
Yeah.
Like
makes
that's
sense
what I
to
mean
me.
is like,
No,
what's
I agree.
the point?
No,
If
like
you're
I
gonna
said,
have to,
I agree because you would then have to augment everything to get up to that same thing. I agree.
sorry,
But
I don't have any interest in playing a non-balanced game of D&D.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like it's balanced as much as the GM makes, because that's the thing. You don't have to make everything else balanced, right? It's
No,
like, 'cause for
'cause
instance,
intrinsically magic and martial isn't balanced.
that's what I'm saying. It's like, to be fair, a lot of this stuff isn't balanced. So giving that to them isn't like a huge thing. They also still have to hit all of those times. They're going to do different types of damage potentially with that thing. And not just that, again, we all are overpowered in our own ways. And so that's why it's like, oh, he's got that ability. I have a freaking legendary Dragon's Wrath battle axe that, is a legendary ascended version. Like, that's super OP. I'm a freaking paladin. I'm already powerful enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like an overt unbalanced, thing that he has over the rest of us. And so it's like, that's fine. As long as there isn't that aspect involved, I don't feel like there's a huge issue. I wouldn't do that myself personally. Same. It's not my favorite. I wouldn't do that myself. But there's nothing wrong with it either, because it's like, hey, we're all super OP and powerful in our own rights.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the way I look at it is I make characters to be competent,
No,
whether they're martial or magic.
No, I get it. I agree. I get it. And I would agree. Like I said, I feel like you shouldn't necessarily audit like either way. But he also, again, one of the reasons why I'm also okay with it is, again, the fact he acknowledged it. He was like, this isn't like a thing that I thought this was cool. It's probably just from me misinterpreting whatever. And I'm like, all right, you know what? That's fine with me. All right, cool.
I mean, I don't understand the not changing it once you know you're wrong, but at least he acknowledged it.
Because it's still fun for them, Sam.
No,
Even if it might be not the right rule, it's still fun, and that is okay.
Well, that's why I said I wouldn't like dog on the guy for it, but I wouldn't play.
That's what I'm saying.
Be like, hey, dude, you enjoy your own game. I'm gonna go do something else. It's all good. We differ in opinion, but you're not doing something wrong. I just don't want to be a part of it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
That gives kind of the implication that you feel there is something intrinsically wrong with it,
because there's something
you are
I don't
choosing
like.
Exactly. But that, again, the fact that even though you don't like it, the fact that you don't like that, but you're gonna leave just because of that it gives the implication that it's like
no, Adam, it's not. It's wrong for me. It's not wrong for them. So
okay,
sure. And that's something I really want. You know what?
Fair.
As much as you're laughing at me, that is a perfectly okay way to feel about D&D, because some tables will just not work with you.
It's true.
They won't. You won't feel the vibe. You won't like the people there. You won't. Something is wrong on your end that you're like, I'm not feeling it. Yeah, and that's okay to feel that.
You're not right for the table.
And if you feel that way, you should leave and find a place where you feel better.
Yeah.
Don't be a dick about it. Don't say this game sucks. Peace. No, but you can use that for the thumbnail.
Yeah. Like,
but the reality is
my God.
look, like, so if I went to a table today, I went to a new table, and I was playing, and it was like a low level start, and someone had Sacred Flame, and they went, "I want to light a candle with Sacred Flame," and the DM said, "Yes, you can do that." I would end the Discord call.
You don't. Okay, you don't need like it. Just
I'm gone.
Look, I also understand people's thing. Look, you haven't had the same experience of having to find games, okay?
Because I've played with the
So,
same people forever.
the thing being is like people don't necessarily want to leave because it
no, I wouldn't leave. I'm being dramatic.
I
would
know
say
you are.
something,
I know you are.
and if
it's
they
dramatic
argued,
and it's funny, but
if
it's
they
like,
argued, no, Sacred Flame can do that, it's fire, and I'd be like, read the goddamn spell. And if they still ruled it that they could, I would be like, all right, I'm gonna find somewhere else to go. I don't care if I don't play D&D that way.
Well, again,
because if they're gonna rule it like that, then what are they gonna rule down the road, Adam?
What if potentially? But what if
what are they gonna rule down the road? Adam?
What if somebody potentially proposed like, okay,
think you're walking down this road? What are they gonna rule down?
It's radiant damage. If that's the case, the sun is still technically a form.
No, shut up. It's
heat.
not. The radiant isn't sun.
Then
radiant
what
is not
is it?
sun.
What is it? What is it?
It's holy.
It's holy. And what is holy kind of usually comprised of?
Angels
and light
and
it's
God.
Light. And what is light? What is light, Sam?
The sun's not the same in D&D.
Light in almost any form is energy based, specifically relating to heat. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. But it's still heat, and so it can still technically light a candle. Now, don't get me wrong. Again, I'm not disagreeing with you. I understand what you're saying, and it's like, yeah, it's like it's radiant damage. It's not actually fire. But also, it's to light a freaking candle. And if you're willing to let Ray of Frost freeze a freaking cool off a freaking, beer, just let fucking Sacred Flame light a candle. It's not breaking anything, okay? Like,
no.
Don't get me wrong. You're not wrong. Maybe later on, they might make a call on something. It's like, okay, that's a little much. And maybe it shouldn't be that way. But once again, only ever in the extent of, okay, this is causing the vast majority of people to have less fun. All right. If it's not being used in a douchey, shitty way, if it's not being used to give like one character preferential treatment above others, then it's like, okay, maybe you can let that slide. You don't need to do everything perfect.
You know what, Adam?
The time.
If they want to use it to light candles, they can't attack people that are underwater with it.
They can. It will just be half damage.
It won't do anything because it's radiant damage. It doesn't do anything in the water.
How does it not do anything underwater?
Shut up.
You're just trying to get something. You're just like,
I don't care anymore. I'm over it. All right, fine. You know what? Label me as a power gaming rules lawyer. We all knew I was one this whole time.
You know, closeted maybe.
I'm gonna have to tell my buddy in our campaign once this is over that I've been called a power gaming rules lawyer. I'm gonna change my Discord tag to it. So that's what I come up as in the Discord now. So I don't care anymore.
Everyone knows.
I don't care. I'm over it. It's true.
You're going straight Dark Sam route.
It's obvious. I'm gonna build a new character. It's gonna be my old character, but reversed. And he's gonna be evil. He's gonna kill everyone.
Mm-hmm. Make him a whispered bard. There you go.
Yeah, I'm making my whisper bard, swashbuckler rogue, and he's going to become friends with everyone and then kill them and assume their form to kill the next person. Hi, what's the new character you're bringing to the table? Yeah, he's a fucking murderer.
He's a nice guy. He's a great guy. He's a calm, chill dude.
He's a sociopath.
Yeah, he's got more like a psychopath. He doesn't feel anything. He's
both.
Yeah, that's true.
He's everything.
Honestly, it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum now.
Because he was never loved as a child, then he's gonna kill everyone.
Or maybe he never thought he was, but he was, but he just didn't understand that. So it's like, screw it. Hey,
it's great. Yeah. So obviously, I'm now pegged as something that I just didn't want to admit till now.
Which you yourself have called. No one else referred to you. You yourself have called yourself.
I just don't want to admit it until today. Here we are.
Hey. Admitting it is the first step to, getting better, as they say. You know what I mean? But yeah, y'all. Hey, that's in essence, I think, some tips and advice we have for any new GMs and players. wanting to get involved and stuff. You know, we already covered, I think, a decent amount of like, so you in our video of
There we
so
go.
you want to play D&D.
See,
Yep,
there it
yep,
is.
Yep. There you go. Yep. Yeah. All right. Sam's new official title, everybody.
Yep.
We did it. This is all because of us here.
It's all because of y'all. You guys gave me the opportunity to find out who I truly am.
We got him to his full potential, everyone. His villain arc, his villain origin story is this now.
It's here. It's too late now.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We love and appreciate y'all. Once again, like, comment, and subscribe. If you haven't, please share the channel. Any little bit you can do will help us exponentially. And we'll see you guys in the next one.
Bye, everyone.